The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, May 21st, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, David Wallace Wells on the Uninhabitable Earth, life after warming. Meanwhile, Trump attorney Don McGann blows off the House Judiciary Committee hearing as impeachment demands rock the Democratic caucus. And speaking of which, a federal judge upholds the congressional subpoena issued to Deutsche Bank. Appeal is on the way to the D.C. Circuit Court, which is chaired by Merrick Garland. Well, that guy. Speaking of chairing, Ken Cuccinelli, he of the vaginal fetal probe, has been appointed immigration czar in the wake of a report that a 16-year-old Guatemalan boy died in DHS custody. We have dual hearings in Congress over the Iran policy. Intelligence liars in one hearing. Non-intelligence liars, I guess specifically about the Iran situation, in another. And local Georgia DAs say they will not prosecute under the newly passed Georgian anti-abortion law. EPA announces they're ending funding into environmental threats to children. And Fox News' Pete Hegseth turns out to have been the main pusher of pardons for accused war criminals. Meanwhile, Italian unions refuse to load a Saudi ship in a Yemen war protest.
Hell yeah.
And Bernie will be showing up at the Walmart shareholders meeting representing the Walmart workers.
Good morning, everyone.
And lastly, the heartwarming story of the Alabaman public television station that refuses to run a cartoon because it mentions gay marriage. All this and more on today's program. We forgot to look up the call I did back in the day to the American Family Association. I don't know if they're still around anymore. I think they are. But they had a culture desk there that did a report on, I think it was Finding Nemo or A Shark's Tale, and blowing the lid off of A Shark's Tale, how it was pushing cross-dressing. Where you have, I think a shark pretending to be a dolphin or something. And this was sending the wrong message to kids. We have that audio somewhere. I was gonna introduce that.
Another element of that movie was pretending sharks could speak.
that was also that was
there was a lot of imaginative license.
Dangerous message.
Dangerous message. But that was inspired by this story out of Alabama. Alabama Public Television has chosen not to air the PBS's Arthur episode. This is, of course, the episode which aired nationwide on May 13th. Arthur, who is is he a lovable mole or something like that?
I think he's an anteater.
Anteater, sorry. Aardvark.
Aardvark, sorry.
Yeah. Arthur, the aardvark, and his friends attend their beloved teacher, Mr. Ratburn's nuptials to his partner, which turns out to be a male, whatever species Mr. Ratburn is. And Alabama Public Television was on it very quickly. They preempted the episode by showing a rerun of a different Arthur.
I'll recuse myself.
Yes, Mike McKenzie, the director of programming at the Alabama Public Television, say they were notified by WGBH and PBS in mid-April about the episode entitled Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone and decided to show a rerun. They have no plans to air the thing later. McKenzie said in an email saying that parents have trusted Alabama Public Television for more than 50 years to provide children's programs that entertain, educate, and inspire. More importantly, although we strongly encourage parents to watch television with their children and talk about what they have learned, parents trust that their children can watch APT without their supervision. We also know that children who are younger than the target audience for Arthur also watch the program. No explanation as to why that would be a problem to watch a wedding. But, I mean, it's, you know, I will tell you this. After they're done with abortion, they've just, I mean, you have state after state now showing that they are aggressively looking to revisit a decision that was made in 1973. So if you are under the impression that states like Alabama, Mississippi, probably Missouri, maybe Georgia, Tennessee, conceivably, I don't know.
Missouri.
Yeah.
I just want to say, too, and don't forget that the whole context for this, even in a place like Alabama, but certainly Georgia, is that this stuff is paved by voter suppression, you know, and to a significant extent. And that was already made possible by Robert's Supreme Court several years ago.
Well, yes. But my point being that if you don't think that they're going to re-engage, Kentucky maybe even, if they're going to re-engage in the battle to fight against marriage equality and not get help from the Supreme Court, I've got a bridge to sell you, or really just about anything, because I'm going to make it up. I'm going to make up the thing that I'm going to sell you, and you're going to sell it to me because you are naive. I mean, you're going to buy it from me because you're naive.
Yeah. Our buddy Steven Crowder, who used to voice a character on Arthur, has since gone to Twitter, and he takes censorship very seriously. So he's said, "Oh wait, that he hasn't said anything about censorship." Do you want to see his reaction?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, he's very concerned about censorship. Here it is.
PBS's Arthur. Mr. Ratburn, the teacher, he came out as gay and got married on the season 22 premiere. This comes from TV Line. The news comes out in an episode titled Mr. Ratburn and the Special Someone. Now, this comes as a little surprise to most with longtime fans. They were citing Mr. Ratburn's obsession with cleanliness, fashion. In episode 246, Mr. Ratburn gets AIDS. That one was in which Spanky also controversially joined ISIS, which seems as though it was kind of a giveaway. So it seems, it seems as though that...
Oh, I get it. Being gay is like joining ISIS.
Yeah, and only gay people
stuff.
get AIDS.
Good stuff.
It's hilarious.
Good stuff. Very funny stuff. I am so glad that I am so glad because, you know, there's a lot of people out there who'd want to chill that kind of speech, and we wouldn't get the insights that come from that caliber of comedy. The old I'm an adult and being gay is like being in ISIS. God, I'm going to be laughing for a long time.
This must hit pretty close to home for him because it's the only real thing he's ever done.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Must be tough to see that.
Who's saying being on YouTube isn't real?
See them move from strength to strength without him.
Folks, are you trying to drink more water? You should be. The amount of people I know who need to drink a tremendous amount of water to avoid like getting headaches or getting sick by the end of the day. And specifically, the other day, Mila is one of those person, my daughter. She had a headache. She needs to drink a lot of water to stay hydrated. I'm not exactly sure what the deal is with that. But when she came to me, I haven't drank enough water today. I got a headache. First thing I do, grab from my stash a liquid IV. It hydrates you 2 to 3 times faster and more efficiently than water alone, with an added bonus of vitamin C, B3, B5, B6, and B12. She should be drinking this, one of these every morning. It's the fastest growing wellness brand, Liquid IV, and you can find them everywhere, even Costco. Liquid IV to fuel tough workouts, help prevent muscle fatigue, promote healthy post-workout recovery. Great alternative to traditional sugary sports drinks because there's no artificial flavors or preservatives. In fact, it's non-GMO, vegan, free of gluten, free of dairy, free of soy. Better yet, comes in a convenient TSA-friendly powder packets that are perfect for travel. That's when I use it the most. Well, travel because I tend to drink a little bit more. I don't know why that is, but also you get on a plane, it's like it completely dehydrates you. Prevents jet lag, altitude sickness. Try and keep some in the office. We have like 1 or 2 packets left. I love Liquid IV. I know you will too. Right now, my listeners get 25% off at liquidiv.com when you use my code MAJORITY at checkout. It's 25% off anything you order on Liquid IV's website. Just go to liquidiv.com, enter my promo code MAJORITY. That's liquidiv.com, promo code MAJORITY. Don't wait. Start properly hydrating today. Also, you'll notice today that I am clean shaven. Usually that only happens when I'm going to go on television, but I just got a little bit itchy because of the heat yesterday, I think. And but when I shave, I should have like a label on me when I go on like on Chris Hayes' program, like a patch, like I was like a race car driver with Harry's. You know what I love about Harry's? I've told you this before. The narrower razor head, that's part of it. Somebody actually the other day noticed, a friend of mine noticed that I do have an asymmetry in my nostrils. And, well, I mean, it's just, yeah. And it's not, people don't generally notice, but I was like, that's why I need the trimmer. Good observation. That is why I talk about the trimmer blade on Harry's.
It's like Coming to America joke.
Yep. Harry's founders were tired of paying up for razors that were overpriced and overdesigned. They knew that a great shave doesn't come from gimmicks like vibrating heads, flex balls, or handles that look like spaceships. So they bought a world-class blade factory in Germany, started making razors that combine simple, clean design, quality, durable blades at a fair price. Harry's replacement cartridges, just $2 each. And all Harry's blades come with a 100% quality guarantee. It's no surprise they've received over 20,000 5-star reviews on Trustpilot and Google. You can get a $13 value trial set that comes with everything you need for a close, comfortable shave. Weighted ergonomic handle. That's also one of my favorite things. The 5-blade razor with a lubricating strip and trimmer blade. Rich lathering shave gel. Travel blade cover. And listeners of my show can redeem their trial set at harrys.com/majority report. Make sure you go to harrys.com/majority report to redeem your offer. Let them know I sent you to help support the show. So a story today in Politico. Apparently there was a big meeting, Democratic caucus, in the wake of Justin Amash, this Michigan Republican congressman, libertarian, outlier, definitely. But he has called for impeachment. Says the threshold's been met. And so you have members, according to this Politico piece, of the Democratic caucus leadership Jamie Laskin, a couple others, Raskin, I should say, who he is a constitutional law professor. They want to start proceedings largely because this is all about the obstruction now, is really the sort of the straw that's broken the camel's back for Amash and for others. When you start impeachment hearings, I've said this in the past, the weight of a congressional subpoena under the auspices of impeachment inquiry is simply heavier, and as judged by the courts, and from a political standpoint. And this Amash thing, and yesterday I said I made it bipartisan, and I was being a little bit trollish with that because I sort of hate that construction that one member of a party can make it bipartisan. But particularly when you're talking about the Republicans who simply, it's a fact, march in lockstep far more often than the Democrats. But just even broadly speaking, there is something between bipartisanship and partisanship, right? That it's not necessarily bipartisan, the call for impeachment now, although there's members of both parties. But what it does is the knee-jerk reaction that Republican voters have, that the only reason why the Democrats are pursuing this is because of partisanship. That no longer works in the same way. It creates pressure on Republicans because if it was just partisanship, it would be a no-brainer for every Republican to say, I'm not signing on to it. I was talking to Brendan about this beforehand. The analogy he made was, it's the difference between it's a crack in the ice. The ice hasn't broken up, but the ice is not rock solid. And that crack has relevance. It creates pressure. And apparently, though, Nancy Pelosi still being adamant that the play here for Democrats is to just pursue serious bipartisan legislation, like things like enhance the do not call registry and, look for an infrastructure bill that will never happen. And
maybe we could do a fraudulent bill with Donald Trump on infrastructure to privatize toll booths.
There you go.
And maybe you'd appreciate a few less calls at night, Samuel. I bet you would.
Here's Mika one-on-one with Speaker Pelosi right after that meeting, I believe.
Justin Amash's position on impeachment, he's tweeted more today. He's come right back at the president. Does it fit the bar for bipartisan support for impeachment?
Well, the bipartisan support for impeachment has to be in the Senate.
Yeah.
In terms of Congressman Amash, his voice speaks to the silence of so many all the other Republicans not to hold this president accountable for the oath of office that he takes to protect and defend the Constitution, respecting the co-equal branches of government. So Amash may be one voice, but the fact that it is in the absence of other voices, it speaks very loudly.
So doesn't it put more pressure on you that a conservative Republican says the threshold for impeachment has been met?
No.
No?
No.
Why?
Well, we have to, this isn't about politics, it's not about passion, it's not about prejudice, it's not about politics, it's about patriotism, and it's about the presentation of the facts so that the American people can see why we're going down a certain path.
That is one of the most incoherent responses. The only thing that strikes me about this, she says it's not about politics, not about passion, it's about patriotism and presenting the facts. The only thing that strikes me about that makes any sense whatsoever is that it's all peas. And she's for some reason, I feel like there's some type of code there, like we're only going to speak in alliterations. And therefore, I just don't know what the therefore part is. But it's clear that she has a plan, and it's just to speak in alliteration. Well, but here's the bottom line. The first half of her response, that Amash understands that the president is completely obstructing the job of Congress. We just heard this from a federal judge. It makes absolutely no sense that Congress has an impeachment power and that they have oversight authority if they don't have authority to investigate. It is a complete undermining of our constitutional structure, what the White House is doing in terms of like keeping Don McGann from testifying, keeping Mueller from testifying, Bill Barr not showing up. This is, I mean, I think there are other reasons to impeach Donald Trump. Again, read the report. Read the Mueller report. It's pretty stunning. You had Michael Cohen apparently told lawmakers, right, this would be part of an impeachment hearing, that Donald Trump's personal lawyer told him to lie to Congress. Basically said, perjure yourself. This is all impeachable. And the idea that Pelosi can say, at least Amash has principles and is showing up the rest of the Republican Party. The bottom line is, if you don't pursue impeachment in this instance, for the obvious obstruction, you're basically saying, that's it. Congress loses the power. This is a use it or lose it type of situation. You won't remove Donald Trump from office, but what you will do is lay down a marker and say, there is a thing called accountability. We may not be able to remove you from office, but we can impeach you. We can put it on record that you've been impeached. And from a political standpoint, it seems impossible to me now that this is tenable, like that this is some type of recipe for winning. I mean, I guess maybe there's some type of 14-dimensional chess where Nancy Pelosi wants to be, lead from way behind. But I just don't think that happens in this scenario.
Can I just add two really quick things? One, it's incredibly frustrating also because when she speaks like that, she makes it sound as if Hamas is doing a Jeff Flake thing, which is exactly the opposite of what he's doing.
Right.
To be really clear, if you read his Twitter thread, this is not I'm a Republican, but I'm a little bit fed up that Donald Trump is such a jerk. He is giving the most clear and cogent breakdown of, and again, part of the reason that I don't put much energy into this is because to me, it just seems demonstrable that they're not taking their functionality seriously. But he's just saying, look, this dude has clearly obstructed justice. This has happened. It's documented. It's clear. He's doing it right now. And therefore, as a good libertarian constitutional nerd, our job kicks in to do X. It's the opposite of the type of posturing that she's talking about. It's a clear clinical case. And she's failing on both counts because she's not connecting with the grassroots Rashida Tlaib, let's just impeach the MFer because, of course, F him, or this is actually a thing. Right. This is actually a job that we actually theoretically do this.
Yeah, if it's really about like patriotism and preserving norms and doing it the right way or whatever, they should be doing these proceedings as the information comes to light without regard to politics or when the election is, or if she's doing some like 20-dimensional political chess, she should tell people that, like, we're going to impeach this guy. It'll be easier to do it after the election.
All right, got to take a break in a second, but I should tell you this. With more than 70 sizes, including their signature half-cup sizes, ThirdLove designs bras with breast size and shape in mind for a perfect fit and a premium feel. Just answer a few simple questions via ThirdLove's Fit Finder quiz. Find your perfect fit in 60 seconds. Then, thanks to ThirdLove's 100% fit guarantee, you can wear, wash, and put your bra to the test for 60 days. And if you don't love it, you can return it, and ThirdLove will wash it and donate it to a woman in need. This is hands down the most comfortable bra you'll own, with straps that won't slip, tagless labels, and lightweight, super thin memory foam cups. How do I know? Well, I don't know personally, but we have outsourced this to our official Majority Report bra tester, and this is the response that we got. They don't have a zillion options, so it's easy to choose something quickly. The fit is great. I usually have to return most bras I order online, even though they're in my size. I ordered 2, and they both fit. That almost never happens. Super comfortable for an everyday bra, but not as boring as most t-shirt bras. Subtle, cute details, so I don't feel basic. There you have it. ThirdLove knows there's a perfect bra for everyone. So right now they're offering my listeners 15% off your first order. Go to ThirdLove, spell it just like it sounds, .com/majority to find your perfect fitting bra and get 15% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/majority for 15% off today. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to David Wallace Wells. We are back. Sam Seder on The Majority Report. Remember, you can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome back to the program David Wallace Wells. He is deputy editor at New York Magazine and author of The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. David, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me. Great to talk to you.
We spoke to you, I guess maybe it was around October of last year or so, based on a piece that you had written that makes up in some respects, I guess almost one section of this book, and it was pretty harrowing. Wanted you to back with the completion of this book, and I have to say, I want to start here because literally yesterday, maybe it was 2 days ago, I was telling my daughter she's got to eat a little more responsibly, a little less sugar and eat a little more protein. She's like, it doesn't matter. 12 years, we're all going to be dead anyways because of climate change. And stormed off. She's a teenager, but I also, we're all not going to die is basically what I yelled after her. But, to a certain extent, she's right about how dire it's going to be relatively soon. And that is what you outline in the section on the elements of chaos, right? We really haven't come to grips with the sort of practical implications of what is all but guaranteed to happen at this point.
Well, I would say that both of you are sort of right. I think that it's inevitable that we get some additional amount of warming past where we are already, and we are already living on a planet that is hotter than it has ever been in the entire history of humanity. So everything that we know of as human biology, as human civilization, as history, as culture, all of those things are dependent on climate conditions and have evolved and developed under climate conditions that no longer hold. And it's as though we've landed on an entirely different planet and are going to have to figure out just how many of them will endure in this new climate situation, which is not just different, but it's changing even more and will change going forward into the future in some harrowing ways. There will be almost inevitably quite a bit more suffering from climate change than we've seen to this point. But I also think it's important personally to keep in mind that we're very far from the kind of scenarios that would mean, the total extinction of human life on the planet. I think the likeliest outcome is that we, over the next generation or so, produce significantly more human suffering, and simultaneously find a way to kind of normalize that suffering so that we look away from those who are in most pain and justify our own lives in part by considering just how much, just how intense the competition for resources and prosperity has gotten. But I think that it would be an ugly outcome, and I'd really like it. I really hope that we might find our way to a kind of more empathic situation where, for instance, we would be moved by the fact that by 2050, some of the biggest cities in South Asia and the Middle East will be made unlivable just by direct heat in summer, which means you wouldn't be able to go outside during the summer months without risking heat stroke and death. These are cities that today hold 10 or 12 or 15 million people, and it's one reason why the UN thinks that we could have, just by 2050, have 200 million climate refugees. We could have as many as 1 billion climate refugees, they say, which would be as many people as live today in North and South America combined, or to be moved by the economic suffering of countries in the world around the equator who have already lost as much as a third of their potential economic output because of the forces of climate change, and by the end of the century would have no hope of any economic growth at all because of the impacts of climate change. Speaking globally, pulling back just from those countries that are being hit hardest, it's expected that the global GDP would be about a third lower than it would be without climate change by the year 2100, and that's an impact that's twice as deep as the Great Depression, and it would be permanent. So we have a situation where no matter where you are, no matter what kind of life you live, your life is going to be impacted, which is to say, in almost all cases, degraded and damaged. And yet there's also, it's also the case that climate change punishes us differentially. There are people who suffer most, namely those of us in the global south, and those of us who it will punish more, namely people like you and me who live in the relatively wealthy West. And while I think, I think we can get too far over our skis thinking about climate change as a near-term extinction level event. It's also the case that life is going to get quite a bit more difficult, and everything that we do on this planet, from our politics to our culture to our relationship to economics and technology, all of those things will be transformed by this force as well, as totally as modernity shaped everything that you did in the 19th century, and say financial capitalism shaped everything you could do in the late 20th century. That's how profound, all-encompassing, and sort of all-shaking this force will be.
All right, there's a lot in there I want to get to. I just want to put sort of flagpole this one thing that you said at the very beginning of that, because we often hear this brings up a lot of other subsidiary issues, but that part about the planet's been this warm before, but not when humanity has been around, right? And in fact, you write that we would not have probably evolved if the timing was off in terms of like the warming of the planet.
Yeah, if you pull back and contemplate the whole universe, or everything that we know about the universe, and how few of those planets, which is to say only one of those planets, has developed anything like the kind of life that we know on Earth. One of the major drivers of that, one of the major factors there, is that life is extremely fragile, requires incredibly particular things from its environment, and intelligent life even more so. Now, I personally think that if the planet was always as hot as it is now, probably humans would have evolved. And it's also possible that we would have evolved and developed agriculture and civilization if it was always as hot as it is now. But, the place where we did invent agriculture, the Middle East, it's already getting quite a bit harder to raise crops. And so, at the very least, it would have been a more difficult innovation. And I think that starts to tell you, just how dramatically everything that we know of as modern life is dependent on these climate conditions. We can think, we're talking about an amount of warming that's 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius. These don't seem like quite so dramatic numbers, and in certain ways they aren't. But when you realize that we have entirely left behind the window of climate conditions that have governed all of human history, it puts that in a quite different perspective. The last time that there was this much carbon in the air, there were palm trees in the Arctic. the equator was hot enough that nothing like mammals could survive. And, I hear from I wouldn't call them climate deniers, something more like climate skeptics every so often who say, the Earth has been this hot before. We've gone through cycles of warming and cooling before. We shouldn't freak out. And I say to them, not just that, as you say, that when the planet was warmer than this, there were no humans around, but that each time that we've gone through some of these climate change cycles in the past has been attended with what's called a mass extinction, with as much as 95% of all life on Earth wiped out by those changes. So it's not something that we can really afford to be complacent or blithe about, even if it's also the case that, humans being humans, we're adaptable, we're resilient, we probably will find some way to endure and survive. The question is really transformed in what ways, with civilization and life changed, in what directions. And I think that's one of the reasons I spend so much time in my book, not just on the scientific understanding of what climate impacts are likely to bring, but really how those impacts might reshape everything that we know and take for granted about the way that we interact as humans on this planet. But we can talk a little bit more about the science too, since I imagine that that's probably something of interest to
I
you.
want to get to some of that. I mean, we covered that the last time around to a certain extent. I want to talk about it in how how this information is processed, or to the extent that we are in denial in terms of the implications, maybe. But I just would say that what if the planet was as warm as it will be when we were as a species developing? We simply would have developed in a different way, right? We would just not be necessarily on a trajectory to create as many people. We would live in a very a narrow belt of the Earth, as it were, but the fact is that it's almost like you move. You're a band of nomads, and you stop by a riverbed and you build a society around that river, and then all of a sudden the river dries up. All the reasons why you were by that river still exist, except for now there's no water. And so that's basically sort of the analogy on some level.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the normalizing suffering thing, because I mean, on some level, this is the process which allows us. I mean, let's put aside denialists, because you make the point that although the Republican Party is essentially the only institution on the planet, essentially, that denies what's happening, for the rest of us, more or less, because the U.S. only contributes to about 15% of the CO2 that's causing this problem. For the rest of us, we are in a different type of denial, right? Like we know it's bad. We're just not really, there's a lot of procrastination going on. And on some level, isn't it like that? Aren't we sort of almost like projecting forward to like, we can deal with that? I mean, I just look back to over the past 15, 20 years that we were at war in Iraq. Depending on whose numbers you want to believe, somewhere between 200,000 to 1 million people die because of our invasion. 4 million people displaced, 2 internally, 2 externally, 2 million. And you could walk around the United States and have absolutely zero awareness that any of that was happening, at any point. And like, if our ability to do that when we were like literally directly, the cause of that, it seems to me that our capacity to say like, what, some city in India, 1 million people? I mean, that to me seems like we're almost already doing that. It's like baked into the way that we perceive this problem.
Yeah, we have an incredibly deep ability to normalize suffering. I mean, the example that I often use to illustrate it is, There was a paper that came out about a year ago that completely horrified me that was looking at just the effect of air pollution, the differential between what air pollution would mean at 1.5 degrees of warming and 2 degrees of warming. Now, air pollution is not exactly an impact of climate change, but it's produced by the same thing that produces climate change, which is to say the burning of fossil fuels. And just between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, we're at about 1 degree now. 2 degrees is what the level of warming that most scientists of the world consider the threshold of catastrophe. Island nations of the world call genocide, and we're on track for about 4.3 degrees by the end of the century if we don't change course. But just between 1.5 and 2 degrees, these scientists estimated, would mean 153 million additional deaths from air pollution. That's just from air pollution, just from that half degree extra of warming. And when I say that to people, when I mention that fact, their eyes go wide, their faces go ashen, and they think 153 million deaths, how could we possibly conscience that amount of suffering? And they're right. It is an unconscionable amount of suffering. It's 25 Holocausts worth of dying. And yet, 9 million people are already dying every year from air pollution, which is a Holocaust and a half.
Right.
And you and I don't think about those people every day. We probably rarely think about them, and we're two of the more informed, engaged people thinking, obsessing over climate change in general. But
I wouldn't know that figure. I mean, it's not a figure like, we're not, it's not coming up on this show. I mean, on a regular basis. And I think like this is what I do as a profession. And I've been even more than you. I mean, I've been working on this subject now for several years, really deeply in the research, interviewing scientists, reading academic papers every day, trying to process, all the news from science very profoundly. And yet I myself still live in compartmentalization and denial and complacency. I think that's a testament to just how intense and powerful those impulses are in all of us. We really don't like to contemplate bad news. We really do like to believe that, say, the lives of our children will be better than our own. We look outside our windows every day and we anchor our expectations for the future based on what we see in the real world today, even though we know when we think about it that there will be surely some additional warming, probably considerably additional warming, and yet we base all of our projections for the future, our emotional projections for the future, on our experience of the present. I think that's really, really deeply problematic. But there's also that same impulse towards complacency and denial at the political level, and I think maybe even most problematic at the geopolitical level. The Paris Accords were signed now just 3 years ago, a little bit less than 3 years ago. They pledged rhetorically to keep the world to 2 degrees of warming, which is this level that the scientists call the threshold of catastrophe. But they actually only included commitments from all of the nations who signed on that would bring the Earth to about 3.2 degrees of warming. So they only got about halfway to their stated goal of 2 degrees. And yet no nation in the world is on track to meet those commitments, not a single one, which puts American bad behavior in some perspective. I mean, I think we have a special obligation for more, towards moral leadership on this issue, because historically we've been responsible for the lion's share of global emissions, even though now we're only at about 15%. But even so, no nation all of the nations of the world that have much more progressive leaders than Donald Trump, all of the nations of the world who have much more green politics, much more left politics than Donald Trump, than America does now, none of those countries are behaving significantly better than the United States. Some are behaving a little bit better. The UK has been doing really well lately. But we're all largely in the same position of not taking action at all. And that is ultimately a sign of what I think of as the problem of collective action here. If the U.S. completely zeroed out its emissions this year, it really wouldn't have a meaningful impact on how much we suffer at the hands of climate change unless the rest of the world followed suit. Because most of the emissions that are being put out there are being put out there by the rest of the world. Right.
That calculus is even more the case for most of the other nations of the world who have an even smaller share of the burden, share of the responsibility than the U.S. does. And that means that every individual nation, no matter how committed to the idea of action on climate change, is in a certain way incentivized to not take action and let the rest of the world clean up the mess. And I can see a way where individuals, through engagement and education, wake up to their own place in this story and become considerably more agitated. I think we're seeing that already, actually. The polling on climate change has moved dramatically in the U.S. and all through the West. People are much more concerned than they used to be, and the politics are beginning to reflect that. I think that politics will move even faster than we've seen over the last 6 months or 9 months, which is a time when, out of nowhere, a protest movement called Extinction Rebellion in the UK basically forced Parliament to declare a climate emergency. Ireland has now declared a climate emergency. The government of Indonesia has put forward a plan to really rapidly decarbonize. I think the politics is moving in that direction all over the world. What I worry most about is at the geopolitical level, which is how can we coordinate all of this action? How can we coordinate all of this energy? Because, if you had to imagine a threat that was big enough, intense enough, all-encompassing enough to call into being a real network of global cooperation, climate change should be it. And yet we're staring down this real catastrophe at a time when we're simultaneously, so many of us, retreating from those commitments, retreating from globalization, retreating from the UN, and adopting much more zero-sum, nativistic, nationalistic sense of self-interest. And I think that that's, in the end, maybe going to be the hardest part of the puzzle to solve.
Okay, all right, so let me, and I should say, just so that we can sort of like get people into some type of semi-optimistic frame here. You make the point in the book that the pace that, contrary to, I think, what is conventional wisdom, that it is not the problem that we have created is one that we have created relatively recently. Like, they talk about the hockey stick. Well, that hockey, the part that hits the puck was only about 20 or 30 years ago, right? I mean, this is not like, we don't have to go back. You make the point in the book that the problem, the problem has exacerbated much more so since the time that we've been aware there's a problem than before then.
Yeah, it's really it was probably the most dramatic moment of awakening for me in doing all of this research and reporting this book, when I realized that half of all of the emissions that we've put into the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels have come in just the last 30 years. That's since Al Gore published his first book on warming. It's since the UN established its climate change body, the IPCC. I say in the book it's since the premiere of Seinfeld. We have done more damage to the future climate of the planet since the premiere of Seinfeld than in all the millennia that came before, all that human history that came before. And that's a kind of an indictment, since that means that we've done that damage knowingly, done more damage knowingly than we ever managed in ignorance. It also means that it also gives us reason to be skeptical that we could take action, dramatic action, going forward, which is one really concerning fact. I'm
trying to look at it as optimistic to the extent that, like,
I think that there is an optimistic line, which is, when we think about just how fast we've done this damage and we think about all of the horrors that could be waiting for us down the line, ultimately those are just a sign of how much power we have over the climate.
Right.
Which is to say, if we get to 4 degrees of warming, which will be hellish, it would mean twice as much war. It would mean climate damages globally totaling $600 trillion, which is twice as much wealth as exists in the world today. There would be parts of the planet that would be hit by 6 climate-driven natural disasters at once. But if we get there, it will be because of what we do going forward. The driver of climate change on this planet is human action, which is to say how much carbon we put into the atmosphere. And we can decide how much carbon to put into the atmosphere. We have our hands on those levers. So if it's taken us 30 years to bring the planet from a stable situation to the brink of catastrophe, which is what we've done just in the last 30 years, we also have about that much amount of time to avert those outcomes, those really horrifying scenarios. And since I'm 36 years old, I think almost certainly my life will contain both of those stories, both the period of time when we brought the planet from stability to catastrophe, and conceivably the time in which we address the problem, took some action at least to avert some of these worst case scenarios. And that to me is an incredible story. It's an epic drama. I mean, really, I write in the book, this language makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but it's drama at the level that we used to only see in mythology and theology. We truly hold the future of the planet and the future of humanity in our hands, and you and I are part of that story, not just as passive listeners or watchers. Everyone who's listening to this is a protagonist in this story and can make a difference themselves, primarily through politics, also through talking about it, et cetera, and to a limited degree through individual choice and like personal consumption habits. But we are all protagonists in the story, which is a huge, huge drama. In fact, I think it's honestly like the greatest drama of all time. And there is a way in which it can be harrowing, overwhelming, even paralyzing to think about all of the changes that we're going to see, even all of the changes that we've already seen. And yet, the scale of those impacts, as I said before, is ultimately a reflection of our power. Ultimately, if we take climate change seriously, it tells us that we are an incredibly powerful species that can write the future of the climate of the planet if we choose to.
So, all right, here's what I struggle with, okay? Because, I mean, and yeah, people can make personal consumption, habits changes, but that's ultimately not going to be enough. It's not a bad thing to do. It's nice. It may have some political implications. I mean, in fact, maybe the political implications may actually have more relevance than the actual acts themselves. Because, if someone sees you stop eating meat, let's say, that may have political reverberations that have actually more impact than you just not eating meat. But it seems to me, or convince me of otherwise, I guess is what I'm asking. How is, in presuming that, look, I don't know, me living in Brooklyn, how much direct impact it's going to have on me, and maybe you can inform me, so I can tell my daughter. But it seems to me that the prospect of me being able to implicate the politics on this is somewhere around the same as the prospects of me getting, earning several $100 million and buying a farm up in northern Canada to ride this whole thing out. When I'm sitting here and I'm thinking I want to, what is the most rational use of my energies here? Is it to, Peter Thiel this thing and go up to Canada and just ride this thing out? Or is it put those efforts into trying to change the politics? Because both, frankly, seem to be a little bit pie in the sky at this point. Like I say, you and I are the type of people who we should be the ones who have had this figured out a while ago, and we're just having trouble convincing other people. And I still, for the life of me, we don't cover this every day. I have no idea what the recipe is to impact what we as a species do.
Well, I think you're asking a number of different questions there. So let me try to get through as many of them as I can from how I see it. And other people see these things a little bit differently. But my perspective, first of all, is that the politics is moving quite fast. 73% of Americans now believe climate change is real. That's up 15% since 2015. It's up 8% since last year. By any political science standard, that is a dramatic change. The same dynamics are at play all across Europe, with real dramatic movement on concern about the environment just over the last few years. Mostly, I think, because of all of the extreme weather that we've seen over the last few years, which for the first time has really shown us that climate change is happening in real time. We had been taught for a very long time it was in the distance. We're seeing it now on our TV screens, especially in the summer, every summer. There is policy action being taken in many parts of the world that is quite exciting. I mentioned earlier this plan put forward by the government of Indonesia, which is really exciting because Indonesia Indonesia is a developing country, and for a long time those nations were understood to face a choice. They could grow faster, pull more of their people out of poverty, or they could grow more responsibly and subject more of their people to more suffering. And it was understood that facing that dilemma, usually they would take the dirty industrialization route, give more wealth to their citizens, but at some significant environmental cost. In fact, that's what Indonesia has done over the last 2 decades, as they've halved their poverty rate, doubled their per capita income, but doubled their carbon emissions. Now they say that they can halve their carbon emissions by 2030 and do so while growing at 6% per year, which is in fact faster than they've grown over the last 2 decades when they made all this progress. There is a kind of global new conventional wisdom emerging among economists who used to think that it was going to be costly and expensive to take action on climate, so costly it might not even be worth it in economic terms, even though there was a kind of humanitarian imperative. But now that logic has really reversed, in part because their estimates for how much economic suffering climate change could bring have grown so much higher. And now it really is the conventional wisdom that faster action will be better for us all. There was a major study in 2018 saying that we could add $26 trillion to the global economy by just 2030 through rapid decarbonization. So I see a lot of hope in the political, the movement on politics here. I think we were trained over the last couple of decades to believe that politics was really inert on climate, but I think that actually is changing. The problem is, the UN says that in order to avert this catastrophic level of warming, 2 degrees, we need to halve our global emissions by 2030, which they say would require a global mobilization at the scale of World War II. The Secretary General says it should start this year. It would need to start this year. So even though politics is moving quite rapidly, it's still not moving rapidly enough. That said, when I look at all of the alternative avenues ahead of us, politics still seems to me to be by far the most important path. And by that, my logic is this. I start from the understanding that in order to stabilize the climate at any temperature level, not just 1.5 degrees, not just 2 degrees, even if we were at 4 degrees, 5 degrees, if we wanted to stabilize it at those horrible levels, it would require not just reducing our carbon emissions, but completely zeroing them out. Because any additional carbon that we put into the atmosphere will cause additional warming. So if in order to stabilize the climate at any point, we will need to completely eliminate carbon. Now, how can we do that? Is it possible that the entire planet, to take the agriculture sector just for a second, that the entire planet would voluntarily, as a result of fears about climate change, go entirely vegan and entirely eliminate red meat from their diets? Is it conceivable that the entire planet would give up air travel out of fear for climate change? I think very much no. And to me, what that means is that we need policies in place to make those sectors carbon neutral, even in ways that we will continue to use them, to rely on them, to appreciate them. So, for instance, there's small-scale research that shows if you feed cows seaweed, their methane emissions fall by 95 or 99%. That's the main reason that cows are a carbon problem, is methane emissions. And if we legislated that all cattle farmers had to feed their cows seaweed, we could basically eliminate that problem entirely. The development, the R&D on electric planes and zero-carbon planes is really preliminary. They've flown one plane over the ocean, over the Pacific, I think it was, but it was a really small plane. And we're very far from engineering planes that could carry hundreds of people, which are the kind of planes that we use today. But we need massive R&D spending in that area, and we probably also need legislation that requires airplane manufacturers to develop those technologies and requires airlines themselves to put them into their fleets and retire the old planes. We simply won't eliminate air travel without policy. We simply won't eliminate the carbon footprint of agriculture without policy. There are some areas where the market and sort of collective action and individual action can make a difference. It's already the case that in much of the world, renewable energy is cheaper than dirty energy. So especially if we eliminate all of the subsidies that we're giving the fossil fuel business today, which the IMF recently estimated was $5.2 trillion a year, those subsidies, I think we would see quite rapid movement away from dirty energy towards green energy. But energy is really only, I think, 35% of the problem. And there are all these other sectors, infrastructure, industry, agriculture, transportation, that are going to be much more complicated and which can only be solved through policy, especially when you remember that we do need to zero out those carbon footprints rather than just reduce them. You and I could eat a few less hamburgers every year, but ultimately that's going to have a very trivial impact. And if we need to zero out the carbon footprint of hamburger meat, we're going to need to implement policy that requires it.
All right. So David, and forgive me, I'm on I guess a little bit of a pessimistic jag here. But when we say
the science is pessimistic.
Well, yes, but I'm talking about when we say we, and we talk about the need for policy, right? That is it seems to me, a second order solution, or at least in the process in which to get to that policy, we need to first get to a we, right? Because on some level, then, I mean, because for instance, Brexit, right? I mean, and there's polling that shows that most people in Europe think that the EU is going to go by the wayside. Put aside for a second the policy prescriptions of the EU, but the idea that you do not have, that you have more disaggregation rather than aggregation, that you have decentralization, means that the possibility to implement a policy, we need to, develop these type of airplanes, or we need to do this and that, is less. Like, I mean, on some level, from a structural standpoint, don't we need an even bigger change that goes away from the market to build an apparatus to have that kind of policy? I mean, how can we do this without also addressing sort of broadly capitalism in some form?
Well, I think I think you're absolutely right that we need a major transformation of our cultural, political, and economic priorities, that we need to put climate change at the absolute center of our sort of view of the world and what needs doing, at the level of the individual, at the level of the community, at the level of the nation, at the level of the planet. At every level, we need a complete reorganization of our priorities. That's absolutely true. And I do think actually that climate change will cooperate with us in that respect, because the impacts will be getting more intense. We will start to see their fingerprints in more and more places. And I do think that we will evolve a sense of the future of the world that is really centered around this issue, in the same way that, we used to center our view of the world around the sort of story of, say, neoliberalism or globalization. I often say I think we will have a legal order that evolves over the next couple of generations that puts climate change very much at the center of our understanding of our responsibilities towards one another as individuals and as nations, in much the same way that, the post-World War II order really emphasized human rights and peace and prosperity. Now, we know that those values were often used as alibis for bad behavior. Right. Absolutely. I imagine probably the same thing will happen with climate change. But nominally, the West was committed to those values so intensely that they went as far as, fighting wars in their name. They went as, they imposed sanctions on one another and on other nations of the world if those countries were not behaving properly when it comes to human rights. And I think actually we're likely to see some of those same dynamics play out in relatively short order. On climate change, you can see the story already unfolding in the fact that MBS, the sort of putative and awful leader of Saudi Arabia, has said that his country needs to get entirely off oil by 2050 and mostly off oil by 2030. I think he understands that as soon as 2030, it won't be possible to be a country producing fossil fuels in the same way that Saudi Arabia has and still expect a seat at the community of nations. So I think the world will be transformed, our politics will be transformed by climate change. The question is, will it happen fast enough, and will it push us in a more kind of collectivist, humanitarian, universalist view of our fate as humans on this planet, or will it push us deeper into a sense of nativism and self-interest, which is where we are now? And I do think that you're right, that's very much an open question, and there's a lot of reason for skepticism. I do think personally that the experiences that we've had just over the last few years dealing with extreme weather have taught a lot of people that this is a force that is close at hand in time and in place, and which you may not be able to escape no matter where you live. I think that the California wildfires in particular were a really powerful teaching tool there. People even who lived very far from any forest that was ever going to catch on fire saw those images and imagined their own homes burning and really freaked out. And now there's also some perverse and grotesque elements of that as a teaching tool, because I think it was also the case that many wealthy people suffered, many famous people suffered, that made us respond to those images. But again, that's useful too, because it shows us again that there is no escaping these forces. And the more that we, as a species, understand climate change in those terms, that it is all-encompassing, that it is everywhere, that it is inescapable, I hope that it will teach us to respond in a more universalist spirit. On the other hand, I look around the world.
It could go the other direction too. Right?
Totally.
Like, I mean, it
just
could
this
be.
Week,
it could be
the election in Australia was lost by a Labor candidate who was pushing an aggressive climate action. He was widely expected to win. The polling in Australia was very dramatic on climate change, and that's a country that is, generally speaking, it's the poorest nations of the world who are already suffering most intensely from climate change and will continue to suffer most intensely. Australia is a little bit of an outlier there because of where they are geographically. They happen to be a rich country, but they're suffering already quite intensely from climate change, and the public there seemed to be waking up to that. This candidate was leading in every single poll for like a year and a half, and yet the coal-friendly conservative candidate was actually the one who won. I'm really concerned about the political situation in Brazil, where Jair Bolsonaro, who's a kind of Trump of the Amazon, has pledged to dramatically cut down the rainforest there, to cut back the Amazon, open it to development, in a way that his own country's scientists say would have the same carbon impact as adding an entire second China to the planet. And China's the world's biggest emitter. That's because most of your listeners probably know, but trees suck carbon out of the atmosphere and they produce oxygen. So the more that we devastate our natural woodlands, our natural forests, our natural rainforests, the less our planet is going to be capable of extracting carbon out of the atmosphere, and the more carbon will be up there as a result. That's another reason that those wildfires I mentioned earlier are so scary. California is way ahead of the rest of the U.S. on green energy. They're an incredibly impressive record. I think still not moving fast enough, but much faster than anyone else in the country. And yet, every single year now, so much carbon is released in those wildfires when those trees burn that it completely counteracts the progress that is made on those green energy initiatives. And that is just one of many, many, many horrible dynamics around the world where it's not just that we're not doing better. It's not just that we're not doing good enough. It's that we're triggering these, they're called feedback loops, that make the problem much, much bigger. At the moment, it is the case that the overwhelming driver of climate change is how much carbon humans put into the atmosphere, mostly through energy and infrastructure, agriculture, and industry. But say in 30 years, 40 years, if we continue on the pace that we're on, it is possible that some of these systems could sort of get outside of our control and become much harder for us to make a difference with, because the natural systems at that point will have sort of started running away with the story, so to speak.
And we should also say that there is another scenario too, where as a nation, or as that nations take that sort of Peter Thiel route, right? Which is like, this is inevitable, so our solution is going to be more of a fortress than, and that could have some very, very ugly implications. But let me just, because we're running out, I want to just sort of like, leave people with some type of like vague game plan. And short of, I will say this: if Tom Steyer is listening, I think a good investment would be take $500, $600, $700 million, create some type of hoax where it's like an alien invasion. Because I just feel like if we had something like that to focus on, like if it was like Independence Day, that movie, maybe, it would be harder for the world community to be so disparate in its reactions. Like, if we had some massive UFO like hovering over a couple of the world's capitals, maybe, we could do it under that type of threat. But short of that, it sounds like the things that people can do on a daily basis, aside from altering their consumption, or maybe in addition to, is to help build the narrative of of local phenomena being a function of climate change, to the extent that one can make that connection, whether it's the forest fires in California or Hurricane Sandy in New York, or a drought somewhere, or extreme weather make that connection. And also, it seems to me, to support, international, multinational structures. Is that right? Is there something else that we can be doing on a daily basis to the extent that we can, butterfly wing this thing in terms of helping, toward a solution?
Well, I think the most important thing anyone can do is vote, and to vote for people who prioritize climate change. And then once those people are in office, hold them to account to those commitments. That's not an everyday thing, but it happens pretty regularly that there's some election in your community at some level. And I think in general, beyond that, the more that you can do to just spread the word, make connections, and make sure as many people are as concerned about this as is possible, I think that's all extremely valuable. In terms of motivating action, the way I see it is the world is going to be transformed by climate change dramatically. Now, I think probably we're heading for a world in which most of that transformation means more suffering. It's going to, the hundreds of millions of climate refugees I mentioned, the unlivable cities, the agriculture that could be half as bountiful as the agriculture we have today, public health issues that arise when mosquitoes that used to fly only in the tropics are now flying up in the Arctic Circle, which will be happening in short order, all the rest of it. The world will be transformed, but the world will also be transformed if we take action to avert it. The transformation is inevitable. It's a question of which transformation we want to choose. Now, do we want to continue subsidizing fossil fuels at $5 trillion a year that is propping up businesses that would otherwise be failing and which are poisoning our planet? Or do we want to take that money and invest it dramatically in research and development and technology innovations that could help us address this problem? Now, I think it's important to understand this is not something that can be solved with a single silver bullet innovation. It's way too big a problem for that. But we do need technological help in every aspect of the problem. We need it to make renewables cheaper. We need better electricity so that the intermittency of renewables is not a problem. We need different concrete because at the moment, if concrete were a country, it would be the world's third biggest emitter, and China is now pouring as much concrete every 3 years as the U.S. poured in the entire 20th century. We need new kinds of agriculture, which could be largely technologically driven, or with genetic technology in particular. We need these innovations. And we need them quite quickly, which means that we need to put an enormous amount of money and energy and attention on bringing them into fruition. Now, the choice before us is do we want to live in a degraded world where climate change has beaten us and sucked out our ability to produce economic growth and to live happily with one another? Or do we want to live in a world where we've met that challenge head on, innovated as dramatically as we've ever innovated, and found ourselves in a situation where human life looks in most ways the same? Now, I think that there's too much warming already baked in, and some of this innovation is going to be too slow to really avert some of these scary scenarios. I don't think that we're going to avoid 2 degrees of warming. Probably don't think we're going to avoid 2.5 degrees of warming. But, when I get asked if I'm optimistic about this, I often say it's really a matter of perspective, because if what you base your expectations are is the world as it is today, you're going to be disappointed. There is going to be considerably more suffering brought about by climate change, considerably more. But I think of it as being much more reasonable, much more rational to base my expectations on where the world is headed, which is to say, the path that we're on. The path that we're on is for 4.3 degrees of warming by the end of the century. And as I mentioned earlier, that would mean double the war that we have today. It would mean a 30% smaller GDP than we would have without climate change. I think that we are almost certain to avert that level of warming, and how much we can avert is entirely up to us. So I think that we can, if you base your expectations on that 4.3 degree level, personally, I'm quite optimistic. I think we'll probably avoid at least 1 degree of that warming, and maybe more. But how much more is up to us, because ultimately, you raised a really good point earlier when you said, who is we? It's a really, in certain ways, the critical question about climate change. Who are the political actors? Who has power? Who is making decisions? And especially when you see polling that shows so much concern for climate change, and yet you see politics that is, relatively speaking, inert, although it is moving much faster than it used to, it raises the same question. But when you do pull back and take stock of the story as a species, as a planet, I think you have to say we probably will do a lot over the coming decades to change the course of this story and to make the planet, relatively speaking, happier, more prosperous, more fulfilling, and more just place. The problem is we're almost certainly not doing it fast enough to avoid outcomes that we today, looking forward, would consider catastrophic and devastating. But that gets us back to where we started, which is I think the likeliest outcome is that we do that. We produce those catastrophic outcomes, and we find a way to live with them and define them as normal rather than unconscionable. And that maybe is the biggest tragedy of the whole story.
Indeed. David Wallace Wells, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. There you have it. And
oh my God.
The end.
Like the number of deaths that he cited that will happen every year because of climate change is just an immense thing to think about. But this is what I'm always saying, though. Like, I talk about how we need a revolution to progress past capitalism and impose some sort of central planning that would actually solve the problem. Maybe, I mean, like a high percentage of the oil that's still in the ground needs to be left there in order to solve the problem. Does anybody trust corporations under the current paradigm to do that? I don't think so. I don't trust them to do it under capitalism at all. And people say, oh, you say you want a revolution. All revolutions involve at least some violence. But look at the violence of the status quo. Look at the violence that's happening now. Double the wars, he said. Like, that's something to weigh.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question is like, what is the quickest route? What is the most direct route to mitigating the trajectory we're on now?
There's also,
and that is ultimately the question. If there was and is it quicker to simply say, like, let's raise taxes and buy or nationalize oil production, or cut subsidies and make it just not profitable? One of the things that happened with TransCanada, for instance, was the pipeline. The thing that really slowed the pipeline was the fact that oil prices had dropped so much that it just simply did not become profitable to take those tar sands. That is and that had nothing to do with any sort of major structural problems. That was just became unprofitable. And there's a multitude of ways in which you can do that.
Policy can do that.
Policy can do that. That doesn't necessarily need structural change. You definitely need an apparatus, some way in which to have policy that encompasses as much of the world as possible.
I just want to say two quick things. I mean, I tend to agree with Jamie on this in terms of like structural, like, I do think you need to it's not only a question of nationalizing these companies, you need to reassert that there are certain resources in this world, even in some type of social democratic whatever paradigm, that are commons, that are not privatized assets, particularly things that both as a, I think Norway's gotten the equation right in terms of public distribution. Something that's just in the ground shouldn't be profited on slowly by private companies. But then on the other hand, obviously we literally need to stop drilling. And I think that, one axis, there's climate, but there is also justice. So somebody like Jerry Brown made some real strides on certain aspects of climate innovation, but not on the justice dividends, right? And then the second thing I would like to say, and maybe I'm contradicting myself a little bit here, but
What do you mean on the justice dividend?
Well, climate is one area, and there is definitely a path where, at the very least, I think on the drilling and supply side, I think it's very hard to deal with that under capitalism. I do. But I certainly think that you could generate new markets and technological innovation, and that's what Jerry Brown was very good at doing. But when it came to, hey, I'm in a poor area and I don't want my town to be, fracked. Pollution is distributed in different ways. Global warming is going to have disproportionate effect on like indigenous communities in Fiji, as an example. There are these other quote unquote justice dimensions of this, which frankly you can skip over in a Davos, Bloomberg, Brown kind of paradigm, right? Like you can cut emissions, you can upgrade the grid, you can change these things and still have a pretty systemic disregard for a fair amount of the population. So I think that that's one thing. But on a completely different end of the equation, and I might be contradicting myself, but I just want to be intellectually honest here. I think Adidas as a company has done a lot in terms of cutting emissions, in terms of what they do at their factories. It's just very innovative. And I just want to recognize what they're doing as a company and as an organizational culture. Thank you. Check it out, Adidas.
Do people in the Discord notice that you're wearing all branded Adidas stuff and make a comment?
I think a lot of people might or might not notice it, but it's really just something that I'm passionate about.
It really is like odd.
Yeah,
I mean, as an aside,
it's just something I believe in.
It's really odd. Like sometimes I know that Saul gets on a jag where he's like, he only will wear a certain type of clothing.
That's exactly right.
He's 6.
Yep. Well, hopefully he won't. Hopefully he will have a greater fashion sense than his father, and also the sense to recognize when a company really is doing something for the most important issues that we're facing as really a globe.
But I think getting back to Jamie's point, I think that what David Wallace Wells was the point he was making is that the impetus for that revolution, to the extent that it happens or not, is probably going to be less people deciding we need a revolution and more the functional equivalent of that UFO coming and pointing a laser beam and blowing up a major city.
Well,
in the context of I mean, it's just a question of whether we as human beings have the mental capacity to see these disparate things that are happening around the globe and be able to synthesize that and see it as emanating from one problem. I mean, it's almost like when the government shut down, that dynamic where nobody felt the impact until it was about plane travel. Right? Because plane travel is like a sort of a networked thing. And there was one or two elements that could shut down a network, essentially. And I don't know if humans perceive the planet's ecology as networked in the way that it obviously can with airplanes.
I think
he was talking about the ways in which climate change is going to ramp up global conflict, right? So it might not be a UFO that does it, but the next world war will probably be a nuclear one.
But
no,
I don't.
And then when that happens, it's going to cause massive unrest, and it is the job of the left to give a shape and a voice to that and make those connections.
I agree with
people.
that, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be more conflict is not necessarily going to be a world war, and it's not necessarily going to be nuclear. I mean, right now, can your average person tell you where there are wars going on in the world?
Well,
not even ones that we're involved in.
I think this is part of the problem, though, that is both being identified in how we're framing this whole conversation. I think one of the limits of, because there isn't just like a world and a planet and a climate that affects all of us equally, obviously. So when it comes to as an example, I'm thinking of Fiji a lot because my friend Joshua Kahn has worked specifically with that community. It's here. Like, this crisis is totally here for them.
Yeah.
So they experience it as a non-abstraction, but they don't have any power. And so they're fighting against something that, they're experiencing. It's totally real for them, but they don't have political capital. And it's going to hit us in the same way. So I think it's like the difficulty to me is that the conflicts will accelerate. They might continue to be on this low, quote unquote, low grade simmer that you're talking about for quite some time. And as long as you keep a certain amount of people with a certain degree of affluence and a certain degree of insulation, you can disconnect them.
That's what I'm saying.
And that's the dynamic we're already in.
Airplane analogy is the same thing.
Yeah,
it's like you're hitting people who are wealthier. You're talking about business travelers.
That's
and you're talking about media people. I mean, that's right. That's the analogy.
Well,
that's
if
the analogy. But if you don't
analogy,
inject justice, that's why I think it is important as a frame to, at the outset, frame it as both a scientific, existential, and global, but also a very nitty-gritty justice and power thing. Because if you at least start putting that on the table, in the same way that you're right about the government shutdown, but what should have kicked it off immediately was when it started jeopardizing people's food.
I get the should.
No, but we're fighting for the should.
But
That's why we do the show. Right.
Well, analogy,
I mean, we're fighting for it. You could be
people,
totally right. You could be totally right. And if you're right, there's a scenario where Peter Thiel is in a bunker and the earth just melts.
here's I mean, to use the analogy,
the rich people of the world are the U.S. in that analogy.
Right.
Well, no, I wouldn't use it like that.
Well,
we're the imperial core, and it's going to come home.
The ruling, not regular people.
Well, here's my point: is that the should, let's just use the government shutdown as an analogy, because in many ways I think it's a very similar dynamic. The question is, if that's the analogy, how do you get, okay, the should would be great. If we could convince everybody hey, you should care about the fact that there are community health centers that are losing their support for victims of domestic violence, which is one of those early things that happened in the government shutdown. And we would report on it and we would talk about it, and it was fairly disparate, and people didn't feel it on a daily basis, and it didn't impact the most powerful people in the country. If there was a mechanism where we could jump ahead or flatten the time to when the flight attendants essentially said, we're going to strike and we're going to shut down the airlines.
Well, that's what,
if we could do
climate
that, even
that's what climate extinction is doing, or Extinction Rebellion.
Well, I understand.
Yeah.
But if there was a way, because it didn't happen, right? The planes did not all ground. There was some, but basically the system did not collapse because it was averted. We made a political choice as a government. I mean, Trump did essentially, made a political choice, was forced because it was imminent. If there was a way to have shortened that time.
So what I'm trying to do.
Wait, let me finish.
Okay.
If there was a way to have shortened that time, you would have helped those victims of domestic violence, not because people were interested in helping them in terms of that Donald Trump didn't care about those people, but because of the fear of this other imminent thing that happened to hit them in their locality. So that's the question.
I agree.
How do you create that sense? I understand the idea that, justice, and I understand the idea of revolution.
I'll make it more specific.
But how do you make
that
that sense that this is going to implicate the people with power sooner than they think it will?
So I'll say, two things. One, obviously it's really hard, because I think partially, though, is I think there's a lot of people in power who already do anticipate that, and that is why there's a bunker industry. But the other way of saying it, which is more specific to your point, is another way of framing the Fiji example, or more close to home examples, even Hurricane Sandy, right, is to actually flip it and be these are examples of the fact that this is already here and it's immediate and it's pressing, and you can't dodge it. So even if you don't have and if you wanted to extend the government shutdown analogy, then maybe okay, you don't care about these centers being shut down, but that's a signal that in a week your plane is going to be messed up.
Well, that's
so
the point.
Maybe
you have to go back to the plane.
Yeah, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I do think you need to, but I also do think you need to, at least whatever way you're doing it, whether out of self-interest or empathy, you need to frame it in a different way than these sort of overarching, it's this planetary crisis and it's really bad, and what are we going to do? Because in some ways, I at least have been reading books like that since I'm like 15 years old. And they always make the same point. They always the science is clear, the crisis is it's somewhere, and it's really bad, and we got to have a World War II type effort to do something about it.
That's my
so
point
we need
about
some
the
type
Fiji
of different
thing.
frame.
I mean, the fact is that I think it would be more convincing to say to someone like, the flight attendants are going on strike, as opposed to there are domestic, like the argument that this is the domestic violence victims are the canary in the coal mine, I don't think is as compelling as saying like that thing that's holding up the coal mine is shaking. And so like that. And so the question is like, what is that in this context? And to a certain extent, like, like, so I think the idea of like Miami's gone is going to have more import, at least in the context of the United States, than Fiji is suffering.
No, Miami is gone, and I think even on a visceral level, we interviewed him years ago. I thought that guy, the explorer, that was on Miami, but there was a guy who just did documentary films where he hiked the glaciers,
right? And
he literally just showed you, like, it wasn't all these charts and all these arguments. He's just like, 3 years ago, this was here.
Right.
Now it's here.
I remember that guy.
And Miami will eventually be gone. Like, I don't think we're going to
have
to
in 10
look
years.
that hard for signs of climate change damaging regular people's lives here in the imperial core, where people have, massively more political power per person than they do in the developing world.
Everybody.
I do have to say, though, I am not here to plan for the post-nuclear war revolution. Like, I think in terms of like climate change, I think one, the policy is really important. I think that's why David Wallace Wells stressed like how much we subsidize fossil fuel industries.
Word.
And it's also sorts of things like just like the Dakota Access Pipeline, how much that like those protests affect the bottom lines of those companies and their plans going forward, and how that their actual nuts and bolts of how they basically poison the earth. We need to throw a wrench in all that stuff. And that includes policy that also includes the people at Dakota Access Pipeline that might have like cut a hydraulic hose here or there.
Yeah, but if you think that progressive government is going to save us, like those protests were violently repressed by the Obama government.
Yeah, I mean, I think
ultimately, though,
the
it was the Obama
state government in Dakota, and Obama was flippable, which
he ultimately flipped.
And the problem with the Dakota Access Pipeline is most of the land that they were putting the pipeline on was private land. The only time that the state had any power over that was when they were going over rivers. And like, I think they should have had way more a role in that, in laying pipelines. Like the entire pipeline, that should be the government's doing. There shouldn't be private pipeline.
That's insane.
Companies.
That is where I think framing that as like a radical position, we need to get, as quickly as possible, we need to make the public ownership of things like pipelines and oil companies like we did with Medicare for All, because that shouldn't be a radical notion at all.
All right. In the meantime, we got to take a break. We are in desperate need of going to the fun half, various reasons.
That wasn't the fun half?
That was not the fun half.
I think if you look at the way Adidas
so go into the fun
all
half and we'll
together.
I can't tell. Is this like an inside joke with one person, or is it
no?
like
I mean,
we were
also
talking about
Puma
before?
as well. I mean, there's a lot of work.
Or are you literally getting money for product placement and the joke
That's
is
what I asked
hiding
earlier.
Yeah, irony. All right, go ahead.
Jesus. Adidas is really scraping the bottom of the barrel, though, if they're looking to endorse it. With all due respect.
You only insult yourself when you say that, Sam.
No, I'm insulting you. It's an athletic brand. You just don't come off as the most athletic.
Oh no, I mean certainly in this office. Matt's athletic.
I think we're going to be heading. I think the boxing thing is going to come up. Look at Brendan's look when he
Brendan's
said that.
Good.
I think we need to do basketball.
Yeah, let's do a basketball thing.
I don't want you to get injured. Listen, you bitch. For a couple of weeks.
I'll be fine.
Oh yeah, we
played
basketball.
I will. Believe me,
hurt my foot.
Basking in the victory will take care of all the pain.
Fucking
believe me.
Feeling your fucking.
How are you on playing basketball?
Ass.
Are you good?
My stomach. I was good when I played, but I haven't played for years. When was the last time you played?
It doesn't matter.
When was the last time you played?
If you're good, you're good.
Okay, then I'm good.
Yeah,
I had a nice fadeaway jumper, and I did it in Worcester. I did. I was, you know what? Put it this way. I'm sure that I would have done very well at your Jewish YMCA games that you were playing in, Sam.
Well, first of all,
JCA
the YMCA
or whatever you were playing. Yeah, yeah. Sam was just like, all right,
Jewish
fellas,
young Christian, young male Christian association.
JCA, whatever.
That's great.
I would have done incredibly well.
Let's save this for the fun half.
We've actually thought about softball, though.
Oh, softball, let's do.
Jews can play basketball. Have you seen Bernie making those baskets?
We all can play basketball. Jews are good because basketball favors a certain sort of witty dishonesty. It's in our genes. No, actually, there was a presentation that I saw once where they talked about how basketball was racialized. And they went back to the first racist commentaries on basketball, and it was actually on Jews. And there was lines like,
it's very Jewy.
The Jews are good at basketball
Dolph
because
Shays.
it requires a certain degree of deception.
Amari Stoudemire.
And this is real stuff.
I'm going left. No, I'm not. I'm going right. All right.
I had a fadeaway jumper.
Just a reminder,
Did you see
folks,
that, Dad?
This program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, for just pennies a day, we give you extra content, we give you commercial free, and you support the free show. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Today is Tuesday. That means tonight is Tuesday night. Michael, what is happening on the Michael Brooks Show?
Well, first we are going to have what is it called, Matt? Again?
Mukbang.
We're going to be eating our survival food bucket to celebrate 2,000 patrons, which we're already pretty well over now. When we get to 3,000 patrons, we will do something pleasant and
beers.
fun. Yeah, we're going to have some beers, and we'll live stream that. Pretty Bad Lefty, Chad Vigorous, BJ Sutton is with us tonight. We're talking about nerdery, Nate Silver, Elizabeth Warren, why it's a problem.
I met that guy last week at the Katie Halper show. He's pretty cool.
He's a very, very cool guy. And we're also going to be talking about the distinction within foreign and military policy between Sanders and Warren, and also some pretty important on a wonkery level loopholes that are in her green military plan, which could sort of, if you give a military officer a waiver, if some type of green requirement might quote unquote threaten national security, that might disincentivize the whole process. So we're going to talk about that and plenty of other things. Patreon.com/TMBS. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. We'll probably be feasting at around 6.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada.
What are you guys eating?
I'm
joking.
I'd come up with something funny for that. Milkshakes. We're having milkshakes.
Nice.
The official
vegan
food of Antifa. Yes, of course, I don't do well with dairy. Andy, AP Andy, our producer, hath returned from the first ever Trotskyism conference in Cuba. And he did some interviews with some people while he was there. He's got an interview with Isabel Diaz-Torres from Anarchist Library Abra in Havana, and Simon Rodriguez from Venezuela Voices. So Isabel Diaz-Torres was arrested last week for organizing a parade against homophobia in Cuba. The government still does not like you to do your own protests there. So she's going to talk about that. And Simon Rodriguez is part of the Partido Socialismo y Libertad, that is part of the left opposition to Maduro in Venezuela. So that is coming out tomorrow, and I'm excited to listen to it. I haven't listened to it yet.
Matt.
Yeah, Literary Hangover, The Song of Hiawatha is the most recent episode that's just been put onto YouTube. Later this week, actually, maybe Thursday night, patrons will get the Margaret Fuller episode. She's sort of the leading feminist and socialist of the Transcendental Movement, and the first female foreign correspondent. She was a correspondent during the 1848 revolutions in Europe, where she became more of a socialist. That'll be out on Saturday for everybody. Literary Hangover. Check it out.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. Fun half coming up.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back. Just wanna degrade the white man. Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them.
Almost says what? Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Fun half. Just saw this piece here in the University of Chicago News. I'm not sure why I have access to this or why I'm getting this or whatnot, but study of landmark 1960s pre-K program finds gains in education, health, and employment. Intergenerational. The papers expand on work originally done from 1962 to 1967, when there was the late psychologist David Weikart designed the high-scope Perry Preschool in Ypsilanti, Michigan. That's fascinating. That is where my former wife was, I think, born there, right around that time. Working with a sample of 123 low-income African-American children, Weikart and his colleagues randomly assigned 58 individuals to enter an enriched preschool environment, one that incorporated 2.5-hour weekday sessions and weekly 1.5-hour home visits with the certified public school teachers. So presumably you have half the kids are going to just a classic daycare center where basically the kids are just, I don't want to say warehoused, that's unfair, but the people watching the kids were not instructed in pedagogical processes versus pre-K, where you have trained educators who work with the kids and do stuff that is consistent with where they are in a developmental process and helping them hit or work on stuff that is developmentally appropriate, and just giving them the level of attention. And apparently, When compared with children of non-participants, the children of the Perry preschoolers were more likely to complete high school without suspension, 67 to 40%. More likely to be employed full-time or be self-employed, 59 to 42%. They were also less likely to have ever been arrested. They also showed better health, according to biomedical tests administered around age 55. And were also more likely to report that their own children were healthy. I mean, that's a stunning return on investment for pre-K. In this city, Bill de Blasio, again, for all his flaws, instituted universal pre-K. It went off without a hitch. I mean, it was sort of shocking how there was not a barrage of stories saying that, like, to go from basically 0 to 60 like that in, I think it was in the course of like 18 months. I mean, it's pretty stunning. And we will see, I mean, they are seeing benefits to health 50 years later in these people, just as a function of having that early intervention. I mean, and when you think about it, just from a common sense, it makes sense. When you think about some of your more vivid memories, your childhood, even when you're in your 30s or 40s, those early years have far more weight in terms of your life trajectory than, any other 7, 5, 3-year period intermittent throughout your life. You can see it in the context of, I mean, if you grow stuff like trees, you can see you have the ability to literally shape a tree at when it's a small sapling, and 40 years later you see the implications of it.
Yeah, I learned in my intro to psych class in college that your intelligence as an adult is largely determined by the number of words adults say to you that aren't them yelling at you about stuff when you're a little kid.
There's a ton of research that shows that children living in poverty enter into kindergarten with a massive tens of thousands of listening word vocabulary deficit, simply based upon how much time they're spending with adults on a one-on-one situation, depending on the opportunities that you have as a kid that age to access. Hey, take a trip. You go to a foreign country. You go to a different city. You go into the country as opposed to just being in the city, or vice versa. Just being exposed to different things, having different toys, being read to, having parents that are not, so exhausted at the end of the day that they don't have time to read to the kid, or have the ability to get a babysitter so that they can spend some time with the kid, or someone to clean the apartment or the house once a week or something. I mean, all of those advantages that some measure of wealth brings you ends up impacting the children at that age. So interesting in that respect. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. Now, John, let me guess what you're going to be talking about. You want to raise the fact that you were right about impeachment and I was wrong, but you are not. You are ignoring the fact that there is a material difference now between now and what the situation we were in just even 2 months ago.
Why can't you just admit you're wrong, Sam?
Well, hold on. Let John and I handle this. You and I will take it out on the basketball court. John?
Yeah. Well, I really wasn't going to talk about that. But,
oh, okay. All right. Well, then let's talk about what you were going to talk about.
Wrong again.
Okay. So, yeah, what's the status of Ring of Fire? Because you said that you were breaking away from your normal radio format, and you had 2 interviews, and they lasted 53 minutes. Very good interviews, by the way, one with Eric Alterman. instead of an hour and 53 minutes like you usually have.
This is like one of those old segments that they used to have on UHF channels, Ask the Manager, for half an hour on Fridays, where it's like you could talk about program. We're going to be doing the normal version of Ring of Fire this week, but we are contemplating leaving terrestrial radio, frankly, because it is the return on investment in terms of the amount of work that we have to put into it. And what's happening with the radio industry is just not quite worth it. I mean, the thing I like about Ring of Fire is it gives me the opportunity to do interviews that I wouldn't necessarily do on the Majority Report, shorter ones, maybe based on shorter pieces. But that, the nature of that could change too. I'm not sure. What's your take, John?
Well, I just, enjoy hearing your interviews, and I think it's a really good show. And so I just, want to see it continue and last, that time period. So if you're going to do an all internet show, is it going to be, like less than 2 hours, or is it going to be less than an hour?
I don't know. We haven't really thought about it that much. I mean, our plan was to actually do a third interview on that program, but it just didn't pan out.
Okay.
But now, why would you be upset if it was less than 2 hours, John? I mean, why are you hiding the ball here? Why don't you just come out? Don't be so.
No, I was just very honest. I was giving you a compliment. I mean,
I'm taking the compliment.
Week.
I just want to know, this is. I just want you to be a little more straightforward.
Well, I just want to hear as much Sam as I can.
All right. Well, I appreciate that.
Sam, he
very
will
honest.
kick your ass. Why do you keep trying to play dumb here?
If you find yourself at a loss for stuff to listen to, there's always the Antifada, as well as the Michael Brooks Show and Literary Hangover.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. All right.
Oh,
don't sound too excited.
You put that right in the strike zone for him. I was waiting.
So what else? Is that it?
I've listened to those shows.
Is that it?
Statewide polls
Yeah.
are more important than national polls because we don't have a national election. It's
Correct.
good to see Bernie tied with Biden in the latest change poll that came out yesterday in Iowa. When I called in 2 weeks ago, I talked about a change poll in New Hampshire that had Bernie up by 4 over Biden in New Hampshire. Bernie had a decent results in Nevada, Texas, and California, and Bernie had a lead, which is a Super Tuesday state in Massachusetts. In 2016, Bernie won Super Tuesday states in Minnesota, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Vermont, and also he won in Utah this year as a Super Tuesday state also. The huge leads that Biden had mounted in the weeks following his announcement have receded in national polls conducted in the last 11 days. Biden's lead has shrunk to about 15 points over Bernie nationally. The American Association for Public Opinion Research held its convention last week, and Brian Schaffner, a poli-sci professor at Tufts University, tweeted on Friday, April 2011, I can't believe you're doing online polling. That's crazy. April 2014, please tell me about online polling. April 2019, I can't believe you're doing phone polling. That's crazy. Here's a tweet from me in response to Schaffner's tweet. Phone polling was considered the gold standard, and it hasn't performed well in the Trump era with relatively different results in online polls. It's hard to get Gen X and millennial voters who didn't answer calls from numbers they don't know because there's such a generational divide between Bernie supporters and Biden and other centrist candidates. This will be a major factor in evaluating polls in the future. I highly recommend the documentary Knock Down the House featuring AOC and other Justice Democrats. One nugget from the film is that AOC
Wait, John,
conducted...
hold on for 1 second. This is all, you did all of that in a tweet? Or was it a thread? I mean, did you do that in one tweet?
No, there was one tweet that I quoted from. I did do a pretty long thread.
Okay.
About it was more about the discrepancies in the change poll that came out from Iowa. But anyway, so the nugget from the movie was that AOC said there was an internal poll that had her down by 35 to Crowley. Crowley said the same thing. down by 35. She won by 13 points. Ayanna Pressley was down by 13 points in a phone poll conducted by Boston's NPR station in BUR a month before the election. Pressley won by 18 points. Our Revolution endorsed Dana Balter was up by Juanita Perez-Williams, who was endorsed by the DNC, was up by 13 points in a Siena phone poll. Balter ended up winning by 25 points. So we're in an era where polling drastically underestimates younger voters that are more progressive. So let's work hard to support Bernie and other progressive candidates during the 2020 elections. There's an article in Politico that said that came out yesterday called "Pollsters Rush to Patch Fraying Methods for Trump Re-Election Lays." Professional pollsters say the old ways of conducting surveys are fading fast, but new methods might be trusted for next year. So, if you want to comment on any of that,
well, it sounds to me like polls are not as deterministic as we thought. I mean. The polling for Clinton was pretty accurate in terms of a national polling, right? I mean, It's just the problem was we just didn't know where the votes were coming. When you get this localized, though, I guess it's a different story. Is that it? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, what I'm suggesting is that people don't answer their cell phones. Young people don't answer the cell phones, and it costs a lot of money to get access to cell phone numbers. And so they're being undersampled, and that's why, even though there's no public polling for the AOC race, they had internal polls, and they were both way off, and the same thing with the Pressley race, same thing with the Balter race, and we're just going to keep seeing that to where they're underestimating, the support for younger voters. Also, you're going to be seeing the split for younger voters is going to be much more important in polling than ever before because they support this. The younger voters support the progressive candidates, and so you're already seeing major, arguments about this in various polls that came out. Like this guy Patrick Murray, who I was talking about, who did the Monmouth poll. He's saying that he's doing polling by email now, which is the newest thing. You actually send email to people and have them poll on that. And so, it's just there's going to be a lot of, variations, and it can be – I just don't want a lot of Bernie supporters to get down,
all right.
Because, things are improving for him. And if you look at individual state polls, he's doing much better than he's doing in national polls. And a lot of that's because of the people in the South. He's still doing very well in the South despite going there this weekend and having a really, some great rallies. He's still quite down quite a bit. So
we shall
hopefully
see.
That'll improve also.
Appreciate the call, John.
Keep calm and
thank
carry on. That's what I say. I have a poster of it in my bachelor pad.
So Ben Carson, Secretary Ben Carson, who is the chairman of HUD, the Secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. HUD is in charge of the of public housing. They provide all sorts of. Here, let me read what they do. Okay, they do housing. In fact, you know what? Go to this page here so that everybody can see this. Matt, I'll send you the link. This is the HUD page. Here it is. What we do. And in the first column of HUD.gov, what we do is housing. You'll see that there. It's on the left. And right in there is avoiding foreclosure. That's the first thing. It's really the first thing in the first part of what HUD does there, according to them. Buying a home, home improvements, homes for sale, HUD homes, senior citizens, homelessness, vets, and then fairness. They uphold housing law and anti-discrimination law, fair lending, housing discrimination, disabled persons, rental assistance. They provide voucher programs, Section 8 programs, searching for an apartment. Then they go down to there's a sustainability programs, research, and working with HUD.
Yeah, very
but let's just, all right, so HUD, what we do, housing, avoiding foreclosure, the first thing. So now this was at the what hearing was this that Porter's at? Talking to a HUD secretary. Not sure what the hearing is, but it's a congressional subcommittee. And Katie Porter, who is a congresswoman elected in this last class from California, she worked very closely with the California Attorney General's office in dealing with foreclosures and real estate in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008. She is a protege of Elizabeth Warren's, actually took her class in Harvard, I believe, back in the day. And so she's questioning HUD Secretary, again, Housing Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson, who's been on the job now for about 2.5 years. So, he came in, steep learning curve, but he's been on the job for 2.5 years.
Settling in.
Okay, go ahead.
As you look it up, I'd also like you to get back to me, if you don't mind, to explain the disparity in REO rates. Do you know what an REO is?
An Oreo?
No, not an Oreo. An REO. REO.
Real estate?
What's the O stand for?
Organization?
Owned. Real estate owned. That's what happens when a property goes to foreclosure. We call it an REO. And FHA loans have much higher REOs. That is, they go to foreclosure rather than to loss mitigation or to non-foreclosure alternatives like short sales than comparable loans at the GSEs. So I'd like to know why we're having more foreclosures that end in people losing their homes with stains to their credit and disruption to their communities and their neighborhoods at FHA than we are at the GSEs.
Owned is right.
Now, okay, so let me just tell you what it is and why it is so stunning that Ben Carson thought, Katie Porter was talking about a cookie, and then when she said, no, not a cookie, REO, he was smart enough to go like, well, I am chairman of HUD.
Wait, is there a cookie around?
There's homes, and of course we deal with a lot of what's going on in terms of loans and foreclosure. In fact, that is under the what we do. That is the number one thing that we deal with, foreclosures. Real estate, I got that right. Obviously organization. But no, it's real estate owned, which when a property goes into foreclosure, if it is not dispensed, if it doesn't come out of foreclosure, if it's not sold as a short sale, in other words, basically less than it's worth, or if the bank is not able to sell it, the bank ends up owning it, or could be also theoretically a government agency. She was wondering why it is that loans that come from the Federal Housing Authority, as opposed to the GSEs, which would be Fannie or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac,
communism. Why
is it that the homes from the Federal Housing Authority go into foreclosure and are not resolved in some way, so that the homeowners just lose there's something going on that is creating this disparity. In other words, maybe the FHA is not functioning well with the agenda of making sure that these foreclosed homes either at least, bring some return to its inhabitants or keep the people in their homes, give them foreclosure relief.
Sam, you seem really perturbed by this. Would you like an Oreo?
But the idea that we have a secretary of HUD who doesn't know what that term is.
I'll tell you what I do know. I know how to select a $31,000 dining set for my office and look fly as hell.
Stunning.
Let me explain. Look.
This isn't what's going on with our government now.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Boy Scout, Jew Scout, Sam. Let me explain something to you.
Jew Scout?
Yes, I said because it's like Boy Scout except with your Jewish characteristics. So let me explain something. When I was in college, I was trying to study for an exam, and I fell asleep, and I wasn't prepared, and I was scared that I would not pass that exam. And then I had a dream where God gave me the answers to all of the questions on my test so I could pass with an A. Now, if it was important for me to know what an EO was or an IO or whatever else that horrible mean woman was talking about, don't you think it would have been revealed to me in a dream? I'm going to ask you to use a little bit of logic. I'm interested in talking about ideas.
You're talking much faster than actually.
I'm talking about what, you want a cookie?
So you can say that he's not doing his job here, but his job isn't what it says on the website. The job that he's been hired to do is to dismantle whatever is left of public housing assistance in this country, and he's doing it very well.
I don't even think that he's tasked with doing that. I think it's just like, if we put this guy at the head of this department, it's all going to collapse.
Yeah,
and that's basically what's happening.
The same outcome, right?
Yes,
what we're doing is handing people copies of The Secret. And they can picture the home that they truly desire.
That's just stunning.
So
is
that
there more
instead
from
of
this
saying
hearing? Okay.
It's more from my hearing where other people were worried.
Let's go on to something else. Okay.
Things.
So, meanwhile,
Jew Scouts got a stick.
All right. Jesus.
Just FYI.
Ben Carson's got more anti-Semitic since he's been at HUD.
So on Monday,
it's part of the culture.
On Monday, a district court judge, Amit Mehta, basically struck down the president's effort to quash a subpoena that the House Oversight and Reform Committee had issued to the accounting firm Mazars USA, looking for Trump's financial records. This is going to impact, I think, the attempt by the Trump administration to also quash a Deutsche Bank subpoena as well, from, I think it's from a different committee. There was a 41-page opinion. And apparently, I've yet to read the opinion, but according to Politico, Mehta systematically dismantled the Trump's legal team's arguments against the validity of the subpoena, pushed back on claims from congressional Republicans that the House Judiciary Committee must formally launch an impeachment inquiry before issuing such subpoenas, which is one of the most relevant reasons to set up impeachment inquiries, because there is far less controversy over the whether the judiciary will uphold subpoenas from an impeachment committee. The judge said it's simply not fathomable that a constitution that grants Congress the power to remove a president for reasons including criminal behavior would deny Congress the power to investigate him for unlawful conduct, past or present, even without formally opening an impeachment inquiry. Mehta noted that Congress had twice investigated alleged illegal activity by Presidents Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton. Congress plainly views itself as having sweeping authority to investigate illegal conduct of a president before and after taking office. We could go on, but this case has now been, will be, if it hasn't already, appealed by Trump's attorneys, and the appeal will be filed with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, just a little reminder about this court. It is, the chief judge is Merrick Garland. You may remember him for the guy who did not get a hearing on whether he should be on his nomination to the Supreme Court. But even more relevant that you must keep in mind, I can't remember how many years ago now this was, 5 or 6 years ago, Republicans refused in the Senate to hold hearings to seat 3 more judges. It's an 11-panel court, 11-judge court. They have actually others that are sort of emeritus that sit in on some cases. But it's essentially an 11-judge court. There were only 8. It was deadlocked. Republicans kept obstructing via use of the filibuster. and would not seat the other 3. They started to make the argument that you only need 8 judges there. And that's when Harry Reid basically nuked the filibuster so that they could seat those other 3 judges. And of course, this is the second most powerful court in the country that deals with questions like this, because it's in Washington. It also deals with the authority that government agencies have. And that can cut both ways, insofar as people can sue the EPA for not living up to their statutory obligations, which is happening now. Back during the Obama administration, you had people like Chris Kobach who would sue the EPA for supposedly overstepping their statutory limitations. And so you see that changes depending on the administration, where people are using the law as a way of getting the agencies to do a certain job. And but when a Democrat's in the office, Republicans are suing to keep the agency from doing their job. So interesting turnabout. And this process is not going to go on too far. They're going to file this within a timely manner. I'm not sure how many weeks they have. And they will file it. And I would imagine the D.C. Circuit Court is going to hear it rather quickly. But it is all this delay tactics that is pushing the Democratic caucus to push for impeachment. Here is Donald Trump complaining about this ruling by this federal judge.
An Obama-appointed judge. Go ahead. Well, we disagree with that ruling. It's crazy because you look at it, this never happened to any other president. They're trying to get a redo. They're trying to get what we used to call in school a do-over. And if you look, we had no collusion, we had no obstruction, we had no nothing. The Democrats were very upset with the Mueller report, as perhaps they should be. But, I mean, the country is very happy about it because it was never anything like that. And they're trying to get a redo or a do-over, and you can't do that. As far as the financials are concerned, we think it's it's totally the wrong decision by, obviously, an Obama-appointed judge. He was a recent Obama-appointed judge.
I mean, I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about, the redo or the do-over that we used to call it in school. I guess he's talking about the election. But in fact,
I think he's talking about the Mueller report.
Well, yes, but the judge clearly said there is precedent for Congress to provide oversight. So maybe he didn't read the decision. But to one extent, the fact that it is an Obama judge, I think, sadly, has more and more relevance because we have 1/6 of the judiciary. The circuit court judiciary, which actually is where this case is headed, 1/6 is now appointed by Trump. It is the most of any president in this point in their term. And the amount of conservative judges on the federal courts is extraordinary. And you can almost, there are occasions where you get a George Herbert Walker judge who will rule against Donald Trump, occasionally a GWB judge, occasionally less so than his Poppy Bush. But the Trump judges, they all rule down the line for Trump. And as you would imagine, also for business and against government authority and whatnot. So one more example of the relevance of the judiciary, and even as horrific as Joe Biden is, he is not going to appoint judges from the Federalist Society, which is the exclusive feeder for Trump judges, which has huge import. Huge import.
Well, when Trump says that, he's hinting at something that people already suspect about judges, which is that they rule not based on these like arcane close readings of the Constitution or whatever, but based on their politics and their ideology. It just so happens that most of the judges appointed by Democrats, their politics and their ideology are to preserve norms and, justify everything with like a good faith reading of the Constitution, whereas the ones appointed by Republicans are just like openly ideological reactionary activists. So
much more so the more recent ones, because that has been the project of the Federalist Society over the years.
So like, given that fact, it would make sense maybe for Democrats who are actually progressive to be more nakedly political with the judiciary.
Well, I think that's the argument that people are making in terms of like of expanding the Supreme Court and whatnot.
I mean, it's not political now the way the Democrats do it, but I guess what I really mean is more open about it and further to the left.
From your mouth to Bernie's ears, because he is still, I think, a little bit slow on the idea of some type of Supreme Court reform. But here is, we haven't played this of Nadler. Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, was anticipating as of about 48 hours ago, Don McGann, the White House lawyer, who apparently cooperated extensively with the Mueller report in talking about the various times that Donald Trump tried or ordered him essentially to break the law. And Don McGann did not. But Jerry Nadler wanted to air this publicly because, of course, so few people have read the Mueller report, not aware of the instances of obstruction that Trump is engaged in, and other issues, frankly, that are in the report may not rise to the specific nature of a conspiracy as defined narrowly by the Justice Department, but certainly stuff that we wouldn't that is impeachable offenses, frankly, by a president. But here is Nadler announcing that he will be holding Don McGann in contempt after McGann just blew off a subpoena.
This committee issues a subpoena, even to a senior presidential advisor, the witness must show up. Our subpoenas are not optional. Mr. McGann has a legal obligation to be here for this scheduled appearance. If he does not immediately correct his mistake, this committee will have no choice but to enforce the subpoena against him. Mr. McGann did not appear today because the president prevented it. Just as the president has said that he would, quote, fight all subpoenas, close quote, issued by Congress as part of his broader efforts to cover up his misconduct. This stonewalling makes it all the more important to highlight some of the incidents that Mr. McGann is said to have witnessed. Let me recount some of them. We know that the president directed Mr. McGann to prevent then Attorney General Sessions from accusing himself from overseeing the investigation into Russian election interference. On March 3rd, 2017, shortly after Attorney General Jeff Sessions did recuse himself from the Russia investigation, the president summoned Mr. McGann to the Oval Office. According to the Mueller report, quote, the president opened the conversation by saying, "I don't have a lawyer," unquote. The president told Mr. McGann that he wished that Roy Cohn was his attorney instead. Roy Cohn, of course, is known principally as the chief architect of the Army McCarthy hearings that destroyed so many lives back in 1954, an actual political witch hunt, not the imaginary kind the president decries. Mr. Cohn served as President Trump's lawyer for a long time, defending the president against federal discrimination suits before he, that is Mr. McCohen, was ultimately disbarred for unethical practices in 1986. Mr. McGann refused to follow blindly into unethical behavior. Mr. McGann told the president that the Department of Justice ethics officials had weighed in and that Mr. Sessions would not unrecuse himself, and he advised the president not to have any contact with Mr. Sessions on.
I mean, it goes on. And of course, Donald Trump did not have contact with Jeff Sessions, or at least that we know of in this regard. He just went publicly out and shamed him publicly. And which is, you know, in some respects, sort of a parallel to the whole involvement with Russia. He didn't collude. He just said, hey, if you're wondering what our state of mind is in the campaign in regards to the 30,000 other emails, go for it.
That's what Trump means when he says he's the most transparent president.
I'm going to recuse myself.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Trump's amazing Jeff Sessions impression. Coming on the heels of denying vehemently that he called Sessions mentally retarded and a dumb Southerner, he then trotted out that Beverly Hillbillies impression of him like a month later.
So this is going to be interesting to see where this goes with Don McGann, and particularly in the wake of this ruling about the subpoenaing of Trump's records from his accounting firm. And this is going to build. I mean, it seems to me an inevitability at this point that we're going to get to some type of impeachment. I mean, it's going to take another, I think, a month or two before the pressure builds enough. But they can't keep avoiding Congress's constitutional role of oversight. It just can't keep doing it. I mean, they can stonewall, but this is just not, it's just not sustainable for them.
I'm sorry, Sam. Could you repeat that again? It's inevitable that what might happen?
Well, okay. All right, which one did we want to do this first? What was going on Fox or? Okay, yeah. So, the other day we talked about the story of the billionaire who gave somewhere between $10 and $40 million to the graduating class of 2019 from Morehouse College to relieve them of their college debt. And Fox and Friends, sort of their brains melted a little bit in contemplating this.
It's a bit of a curveball.
It was a bit of a curveball because they had already crapped on the idea of forgiving college debt when suggested by Elizabeth Warren. They also sort of like this idea of like, well, it's good for billionaires to do this, but we don't want to go too far to the point where they're compelled to do it. But we can see the huge benefits it's going to have for these people. And then they were so off kilter that they, because they want to praise a billionaire, right? And I think they also, because this guy is black, they feel like they definitely need to praise him because they praise billionaires generally so much. So there's a certain self-consciousness, and they, in their attempt to sort of argue that white schools are somehow better for some unknown reason, they told the story of this black billionaire who was bused as a child to a white school, and it was all of the benefits that accrued to him there that he, in many respects, attributes his success to. So they were very confused about that. But here is Fox still super, super unbalanced about this. They don't know how to praise this and at the same time avoid endorsing this on a mass scale.
Smith's generous gift to pay off the student loan debt for nearly 400 graduates may be worth a whopping $40 million. But it raises a bigger question. Is the student loan debt crisis so bad that we need to rely on people like Smith? Jesse, what do you say?
I just like watching the guy's face in the corner when he heard he got his debt cleared. That was pretty good. I think it summed it up. It's funny to hear people like politicians that have driven this country into $22 trillion in debt lecture everybody else about now they have to solve the problem of debt. Usually the government creates the problem and then they have to come in and solve it. Also, the
Pause
press...
it for 1 second. That's complete incoherent gibberish. I don't know what he's even like trying to argue there. There's nobody in government who are saying that billionaires need to just give money directly. There are some who say we should tax billionaires, which is the way that government does things. Government does things by essentially expending money But go ahead.
Of debt. Usually the government creates the problem and then they have to come in and solve it. Also the press, all these journalists, they're up to their ears in credit card debt. And they've been saying it's not a crisis at the border, but we have a student loan crisis. Please, why don't we just get a bunch of billionaires, like Bezos, Bill Gates,
Warren
Buffett. Maybe they can pony up a few billion to clear the student loan debt. Or how about these universities? They have tons of endowment money.
Pause it. We should just tell you that the student debt crisis, and I think maybe this makes hurts Jesse's case that it's not a crisis. He thinks they can pony up a few billion. We need actually, what is a trillion? 1,000 billion. And it's actually 1.5 trillion. So we need 1,500 billion, which is not ponying up a few billion. Maybe that's what makes it a crisis.
A few billion to clear the student loan debt. Or how about these universities? They have tons of endowment money. They can do the same thing. Top 10% in your class graduates, they can get their student debt cleared. Or all these great companies. Amazon, great company. Jeff Bezos, he could pony up a few dollars to help the
But why should he have to, though? That's the whole thing. Should he have to?
Well, it's for a tax write-off.
So we want to go to Michigan. We're out of state, and it's a goal of a lifetime to go to Michigan. It's $72,000. My parents really can't afford it, so I take out a loan as a parent, and then the kid takes out a loan, and they have a great time, and they look around, and they get their first job's $50,000, and next thing you know, their payment's $500 and $550 a month, and that's after you've already paid your taxes. So if you make $50,000, you're probably taking home $32,000, and then you're paying that much. It's hard to pay for rent, utilities, phone. So maybe it's an impossible equation. There's got to be some pushback, so we don't need the billionaire commencement speakers.
I mean, I feel like Brian Kilmeade, it's another one of those situations where yesterday he was praising busing, and now he seems to be working his way to we need to do something on a policy level so that we're not hoping for the largesse.
My theory is
of billionaires. We need to do something concerted because this is really a crisis for people.
Niece or
oh
nephew.
My God!
Niece or nephew.
Right. Is that what you're saying?
Definitely.
He's got a family member who's going through this.
There's some young person in his family, somebody's just graduated from college, and all of a sudden he's like, the numbers just don't work.
Yeah, Kilmeade does not have the ability to throw off a hypothetical like that. That has to be basically, I've changed the names to protect my niece. I mean, the innocent.
Yeah. Say there's somebody by the name of Lisa. God damn it. Brenda.
Brenda Kilmeade. I'm not Kilmeade. Kensington.
Brenda Kensington. But
Wow.
it could also be Catherine Donegan.
Yeah, could be anybody.
Could be Melissa Strange. Look, it doesn't matter.
I think we've hit on one of the contradictions in right-wing populism here, right? Because populism is about hating elites and blaming elites, and the way that right pops define elites is often extremely nebulous and based more on culture and values than who's actually got the money and the power,
right.
But sometimes you blame elites too much and you start bumping up against some redistributive solutions, and you're like, wait, no, never mind.
Right, exactly. Let's cut to a commercial.
What's going on with Fox, by the way? What's going on there?
Well, no, but you can tell that Kilmeade is sincere because whereas what Tucker would have done a whole segment where he had maybe even really put together the student debt crisis really well, and then he would have just been like, and they're smoking pot.
Well, no, I think it would have been the immigrants, right?
Well,
and of course,
they go to school to
it's
get
impossible.
skills, and then Saatchi hires Somalis for their PR jobs.
Right. It's impossible for college students to get those jobs that we all had when we were in school. By we, I mean not me. And that we had when we were in college to pay their way through college, but now they have to take loans because of immigrants.
Jesse Waters still seems to be under the impression that when he says, take Jeff Bezos' money, the left is upset about that.
Right. It's weird. Well, Jesse Waters, of course, he's trying to talk to Trump. So he's not, there's nothing coherent in what he's saying. He just knows, which is why Bezos came up twice in that rant of his. He got lost, I guess, presumably what he was talking about. But so that's going on at Fox. Now, like I say, Donald Trump is listening. He is very, very concerned about what's going on at Fox. In fact, so much so that during his speech last night in Pennsylvania, he's been to Pennsylvania something like 40 times. Because apparently he's a little bit nervous that his numbers are not good in Pennsylvania right now. But here he is talking about how, I mean, it's just weird. This is sort of like, it just feels like it's like a bar room, and he's just sort of like occasionally piping up, and occasionally people are paying attention to what he's saying. It's just sort of, it's weird. But here it is where Trump is bemoaning what's going on with Fox, with Pete Buttigieg is showing up there, and people are talking about
the meltdown he had about Sanders a couple weeks. Sanders did so well, he was just like, "Where?
Why'd you ask me to do
I'm
a town
supposed
hall?
to. You're supposed to be my network, not give time to the
I
other
want
guy."
to do a town hall now.
You saw that. Last night I watched Alfred E. Newman. What's going on with Fox, by the way? What's going on there? They're putting more Democrats on than you have Republicans. It's something strange is going on at Fox, folks. Something very strange. Did you see this guy last night? I did want to watch. You always have to watch the competition, if you call it that. And he was knocking the hell out of Fox, and Fox has put him in. Somebody's going to have to explain the whole Fox deal to me. Democrats.
Something strange going on at Fox.
That was so odd. I love, when we talk about, I think when we first played this, Matt said it was some like fascist disciplining, reminding like the networks like, hey, that's not your job. And what's so great is that Trump is such a baby with such a horrific emotional state that it doesn't even require the like, hey, maybe you should send a little bit of a shot across the bow at Fox, because he's doing it during executive time. He's sitting there getting himself worked up into a lather.
I think he is genuinely worried. I mean, I think that it's partly just disciplining, but I think it's not. I think it's born out of fear.
On his level, it's all emotional.
Right. It's
he's
always
got a lot of fear.
It's always fear and insecurity. I mean, now
Alfred E. Newman's awesome line though.
The fact that he is afraid that what has operated as essentially a rear guard and in many respects as the front,
a propaganda arm, perhaps.
Well, I would say a full-bodied propaganda. Like, it's almost like propaganda arm implies that it's sort of like fulfilling one role, but half of his administration came from there, right? Like it's and
policy shop.
I think he's afraid that there is like there's sepsis in the blood system, that there is some type of infection.
I'm going to wake up and Kilmeade's going to be wearing a dashiki.
Yeah.
Obama's going to replace Tucker.
What's going to go on there? I'm going to go on and I'm going to get some type of question. Was it Chris Wallace going on? I don't like what's going on there.
Used to just be Shep Smith.
Like Trump's worst nightmare is Obama on Outnumbered.
Yeah, it's just like, I think what you ladies might be missing.
Or if one of them, yeah.
Joining us on Outnumbered today, we have Barack Obama.
For the week.
Kennedy, that works in theory. Or maybe if you're doing a top 10 countdown, not in the real world.
Oh, my God.
Obama smugly advocating for Brookings
Can we get Tom
Institution
Steyer?
ideas.
Can we get Tom Steyer to basically just
you should just buy an equity stake in Fox?
$30 million just to put Obama in there.
Oh,
just
that would
to
be
see
a good use of money.
Dude, Tom Steyer could almost literally anything would be a better use of money than, hey, well, you know what? Tom Steyer once again is proving yet another version of the lesson that just because you're wealthy does not mean you're politically sophisticated.
Well,
that is
the
only use of what he's doing.
But I will also say this. It also is, it reinforces what I've said about the center left in terms of the way they spend money. Like, there's no way the Koch brothers, if they were looking for impeachment, would be like, hi, I'm David Koch. Right. You should be doing, it is a function of people of the left, and I mean center to the left, that when they expend their money, there has to be some element of like creativity involved in it, like
or personal narcissism.
Well, but
I think
that's
it's not necessarily creative; it's just narcissism.
No, but creative in the sense of like literally I created
Oh, I'm doing
this.
something. Like, it's my project. I'm Tom
it's my
Steyer.
project.
I'm creatively involved.
Yes,
Whereas
exactly.
the Koch brothers would have been like, well, they got Kennedy on Fox. What about that Bill Bellamy
Right,
fella?
like,
You
who
think that
can
we
we-
can convince him to become a goddamn libertarian?
How far away from us can we expend this money, but have it do what we want it to do?
He popularized
We're
Warren
on
G.
the
Maybe
left.
we can convince them
It's
to
like
cut school lunches.
the money is micromanaged down to the point where like I'm the best person to give this talk. Not any of the millions of people I could get to deliver this message. Tom Steyer, me, I am the best person to do this, as opposed to like, I don't know, hire the guy from the West Wing. Like, I mean, I'm going to get Alan Alda to deliver this, or whoever it is. It's just that mentality on the left, but I digress.
Alfred E. Newman.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 215 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, hi, it's Mindy.
Mindy! How are you, Mindy? What's on your mind?
Hi, I'm not going to keep you real long. I'm calling you from, actually, this is the number I'll be calling you from moving forward because we're getting rid of our landline.
Okay.
Okay.
It's 215.
Because we don't need our landline.
Okay.
Yeah, it's same 215. But so what
I'm
I
not
wanted
sure
to
I
say
like
is
the audio quality on this as much, Mindy, but okay.
You want me to take off my earbuds?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Because if you want me to take, I can take off my earbuds.
I mean, to be honest with you, I really, there's nothing I think is just worse than those like white earbuds. It's not one of those, right? The sound is
I
fine.
took off the earbuds. Is that better?
So much better.
Okay, we will not call you with the earbuds anymore.
Throw those
Okay,
out.
back to the climate change thing.
Yeah.
The business class is starting to feel the climate change thing, whether they're admitting it or not. And, well, personally, I can tell you from experience because my son flies twice a week for, he works for a big company, big national company, and he's a project manager, and he flies twice a week. So he'll be like on one project for like 6 months in Dallas and one in Oklahoma. Right now he's in Oklahoma. Anyway, he always calls me from the airport, and that's when we catch up because he's, bored, and he calls me from the airport. Anyway, his delays are unbelievable. Over the last 6 years that he's been working, the delays were a little bit, and now his delays are getting every time he flies. Now the delays are 3 hours, 2 hours,
Is this
4
a weather thing?
Right, because if the weather's not bad where he's at, the plane is coming in from another part of the country, and the weather's bad, and the plane can't come in. So, like last week, he was in New Orleans, and the weather was fine there, but his plane was delayed 4 hours because it couldn't get off the ground because there was torrential rains wherever the plane was coming in from. And last week he was in another airport and the plane couldn't come in because the problem wherever there was tornadoes last week, the plane couldn't come in there, or his planes are delayed because he can't fly out of, wherever he can't fly out of, like coming home because the weather's so bad. And it's just I've noticed a difference of his delays being so much more now than they were 5-6 years ago.
Interesting.
Like there's an uptick in the delays. So it's going to get worse. And that's business class. It's not any class. He flies business class, but they're going to all start getting pissed because he's real low level because he's only 28. But the ones that don't have their own jets, that are like in the C-suite, but they don't have their own jets, they're going to start getting really pissed.
I see what you're saying. Yes. Like I'm not spending all this time in the airport.
I imagine the private jets would be delayed as well, right? Everyone's subject to the same weather.
Yeah, well,
no, but the private jets are with the people. So they're not waiting on the jets to come around from another location.
Yeah, but they're not being able to work. Like he'll miss a half a day at work.
Right.
Like he'll fly out. Let's say he'll fly out Monday morning to go to Oklahoma. He'll be delayed 5 hours or 4 hours or 3 hours. He won't get to the rent-a-car place till now 1.
No,
So
I hear you.
So before it was like efficient, and now they're not efficient. So it's going to start happening where even though the weather's not bad where they are, the weather's going to be bad somewhere in the country, and people are just not going to be able to fly.
Yeah, I'm
like
curious.
They were.
I'm curious if that is all a function of weather, or if it's also a function of airlines trying to mitigate the empty seats on their planes. I mean, I have a question. I'm sure it's a little bit of both, but I think there's other areas too where this is going to start to be a problem. But I appreciate the call, Mindy. Get rid of those earbuds.
I'll ask him. I'll ask him moving forward if the planes are full, so I can report back on that.
Well, no, but the plane may be full just because of that, because of the delay, right?
Right, but they changed the plane number, but they'll change the. Okay, so originally, if he was supposed to fly on like flight 108 or something, if it's delayed, they switched the plane. They changed the plane number.
Right, and that means that there's like 2 planes worth of people in that one plane.
Right, but I'll ask them if they're changing the plane number, like moving forward. Like when he gets delayed, are they changing the plane number, or is it just really?
Well, just ask him if he thinks it's the weather or if he thinks that it's the airline.
Yeah. All right. You have a great day.
Bye, Mindy. Thank you.
I don't want to know the number. I want to know the reason. God damn it, Mindy.
What else we have here? That
I just want to put this up. Looks like the Milkshakings have made their way to the United States. Dov Hikind, I think he's a New York representative. He has an Ilhan Must Go truck, and this guy threw a chocolate milkshake over the side of it. So.
All right. Yes, Dov Hikind. Yeah. He is a local state rep who is in, I think, I want to say Crown Heights, maybe, or where is he?
I thought Williamsburg.
Williamsburg.
He's an ultra
right.
far right, but like he's ultra orthodox. But he's a power broker. I mean, he delivers votes.
He, I think, is a Democrat, but caucuses with the Republicans or something to that effect. I can't remember quite, but he's always been a problematic, and obviously playing on the idea that in Williamsburg there is a vested interest in Ilhan Omar in the House is a little bit of a stretch if you unless you start to contemplate the idea of anti-Muslim thought. And here is a young man who is deciding to forego his milkshake for the sake of making a point. Oh, it's just a picture.
Oh yeah, it's just a picture.
Nice.
I do think it's nice that you can walk around with a milkshake and feel patriotic now, like you're ready to be a patriot.
I mean, I would like to see maybe somebody market it. Maybe that's what we should be doing. Maybe that should be some merch. Majority Report milkshake.
Yeah, if you have a dairy company and want us to brand your milkshake, I'd
that's
love
right.
to be the face of it.
And it doesn't have to be
vegan dairy.
It doesn't have to be cold. It could be like a protein drink. I feel like that way you could keep it. And the key would be the packaging. Because you want to be able to carry it around in your pocket. And then when you need to, just rip off the top.
A nice
not
big
just a whole, but like a big open top, and
yeah.
just rip off the top like a rip away bag almost. And then almost there should be like a function like where you can squeeze it so you can make it a projectile.
Right. Yeah.
Now apparently I should say,
but I just want to say really
David
quick.
Frum apparently has written a piece saying that the milkshaking is a metaphorical, is that it? Assassination attempt? I don't know if he's addressed the egging, which would probably be, I mean, the milkshaking would be, according to him, a handgun. Oh, here it is. It's symbolic assassination attempts. This is a tweet. May not be violent any more than jokes about attempted rape are violent, but a healthy political culture allows no room for either. Now, that's not true, because the issue about rape jokes is not about a political culture, but it is about actually a one-to-one. It's not symbolic at all. It has real import to the culture. And David Frum decides that the milkshaking may be a symbolic assassination attempt, but it's not an attempt. It would be a symbolic assassination, right? Because the milkshakes are landing. But the fact of the matter is that there is no damage to the political culture, no material damage to the political culture that people make a symbolic protest. There is real damage to the culture when people start to make it acceptable to joke about rape like it's not a big deal, because that implicates how people react to it, how society reacts to it from a criminal standpoint, how it reacts to the perception of victims of rape, and to women broadly, that the idea that they would be raped is just not that big of a deal, as opposed to the idea that people would be milkshaked, that we shouldn't have immediate respect for any perspective that's out there. Now, look, this goes both ways. I think it's perfectly legitimate, and I said this yesterday, for leftist politicians, centrist politicians, political figures. I mean, if the right wants to milkshake me for whatever reason, I think it's a legitimate form of protest. Now, it won't make any difference with me. I've been milkshaked. Like, here's how you know it's not the same. If someone shot me, it would be a real problem. But if someone milkshaked me, no one would care. No one would report about it. The only place you would hear about it would be on this show. And maybe if somebody else, whoever milkshaked me would have a video of it, but no one would care because there's no symbolism, because it's meaningless. It's a meaningless gesture. So the analogy is not apt. And here is a perfect example. Someone on the, center left, not getting milkshaked, but egged, which in some ways is more violent because it involves physical touching.
That's worse.
And here's how people get past it in a way that, even though they've been symbolically assassinated, here's how they get past it. This is
2012.
2012. Ed Miliband doing an interview gets egged. And I remember when David Frum was so upset about this at the time, incidentally. But go ahead.
Yes, he's been on a whistle-stop tour of the places where Labour did well yesterday, and he's stopped off here in Southampton. It was a stunning victory here by any standards for Labour. What do you put it down to?
I think it's a couple of things. First of all, we ran a very good campaign. We talked to 30,000 voters since January, talking about Labour's plans on jobs, apprenticeships, housing, the things that matter to people. We've also got people, I think, who thought... We've also... Oh, right.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Obviously not one of my fans.
No. But hey, go on.
We've obviously got people who came to us because on jobs, on apprenticeships, on the things that matter to them.
Oh my gosh! For a guy who's just been symbolically assassinated. That's how adults deal with it. And of course, when that happened to Ed Miliband, you never heard about it because it wasn't that big of a deal. Because it's an empty gesture. When you egg somebody who the vast majority of people don't feel their ideas are breaking the norms that inhibit people. And yesterday, I interviewed an academic psychiatrist who's done a lot of clinical research on implicit bias that exists in all of us, in terms of race in particular. And the one thing that changes the implications of implicit bias, which we all have at all times, is on the conscious level what we accept as norm, as being allowed. That you can have the same implicit bias in January as you do in June, but if the social context is different, the implications of that bias and how it plays out potentially harms people or discriminates against people is very different. And so the idea that when you milkshake a fascist or when you milkshake a billboard that is
symbolic bombing.
Yeah, is really a hate message, is somehow problematic, is just simply wrong. And it is just more defense of of basically positions that reinforce the right just down the spectrum a little bit. So,
well, it's also only a big deal when people make it out to be a big deal, right? And the right is in power in this country in every way that matters, but they run on aggrievement. So they have to have something to feel like aggrieved and attacked over, whether it's milkshakes or like gay characters on TV, right?
Wait,
Right.
I'm confused. Is somebody else making my aggrievement point?
And
I felt like I might have heard somebody say my point about aggrievement I've been making for years.
The milkshaking is a great substitute for any type of actual violence.
Antifa's the real fascists.
Right, there you go. Well, I mean, look, those milkshakes could be delivered by anybody. Just it's
true.
people who just who are, find some of this behavior offensive, and rather than being violent, they want to say, what you are doing to society is outside the norm. I'm going to act outside the norm, and instead of drinking this delicious milkshake, I'm going to spill it on you.
Yep, like we've said before, everybody should be anti-fascist.
Here we have reports of a 16-year-old Guatemalan boy, the fifth or sixth child that has died in custody of ICE and the Border Patrol in one of their facilities. He apparently had the flu, went untreated for a week. And here is Laura Ingraham, just about a year ago, talking about how lovely these accommodations are. There's a precedent for this. It's when they used to call Guantanamo Bay Club Gitmo, when Limbaugh did it, and they talked about how this was what a vacation spot. And you get 3 squares a day. Here is Laura Ingraham saying that these prisons that kids are kept in, these cages, basically like going to Exeter or Andover.
So since more illegal immigrants are rushing the border, more kids are being separated from their parents and temporarily housed in what are essentially summer camps, or as the San Diego Union Tribune described them today, as looking like basically boarding schools.
Yeah, boarding schools. I know. I mean, I'm sure. I did not go to a boarding school, but I'm sure the cages and the locked doors, the inability to leave, all part of boarding school. And here is Ben Shapiro, according to him, one of the good Jews, talking about how it is so offensive to criticize Laura Ingraham about this.
Is that what she is discussing is that people actually are being treated pretty humanely in detention centers, which is generally a true story. Okay, nonetheless, Buttigieg wins some points with the left for saying all of that sort of stuff. And because he is coming off as moderate, because of the way he expresses himself as a moderate, he's able to get away with pushing very extreme policies. This is the Democratic plan.
So Buttigieg says it's offensive that we are keeping kids in cages. And Shapiro says they're being treated pretty humanely. Almost like they're humane people.
That's who I'd want judging that.
But that's the game right there, too. I mean, that's an extremist position. Buttigieg articulated what absolutely should be moderate consensus, which is you don't put children in freezer lockers.
Right.
Yeah. It's especially sick because crazy Zionists like Ben Shapiro are always comparing moderate American Jews to the Jews who collaborated with the Nazis or whatever. But what he's doing is pretty close to that. That kind of apologia for just anyone can see how messed up and how similar that is to the way the Nazis talked about concentration camps.
It's pretty humane. They just needed to detain them for a while. All right, we only have time for one more call. I'm sorry, folks. It's 3 o'clock. We went late with the free show, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. We just take the next one. Calling from a 949 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is David from LA.
David from LA. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, I just wanted to say I really liked the climate change conversation the first hour. I wondered if we could finish off with a little bit discussing on that.
Sure.
Especially about like the leftist strategy regarding nuclear power. Whether you think that would be a problem like Newport or that.
Okay, so do you have, make your point, but you got to do it quick because you got wind blowing in your phone.
Oh yeah, I mean, okay. My point basically is I think a lot of I'm a big fan of the Green New Deal and like Sunrise Movement and all that, but I feel like they generally focus on renewable energy, and I feel like nuclear might be able to actually provide a more long-term sustainable plan that we can rely on. And I just wonder why you think they don't focus on that or don't mention it as much.
Well, I think part of the problem is that I think nuclear energy in a vacuum is, I think, in a vacuum as a science, as it were, is probably a pretty good option. The problem is this. I think it's like multifold. One, it is incredibly expensive at this point to build new nuclear facilities. Incredibly expensive. And when you talk about sustainable, I mean, sun and wind is super, super sustainable.
Well, I push back on that a little bit. I mean, I think if we're trying to find a way in terms of like power per energy produced, and if we're talking about like trying to solve existential issues, you'd want to have what I meant by sustainable, I meant is more like reliable, like it's not going up and down with the availability of the sun or the wind or things like that. And it cuts us off of fossil fuels because they can provide the same kind of power density.
By the time that you could build the number of nuclear facilities you want, I think we're going to have the battery technology to deal with the problem you're talking about. But with that said, the other problem is that not just the enormous cost. It's just that the system in which we have been running nuclear facilities in this country, the design is very, very dubious. Okay, there are a couple of different ways that nuclear facilities could be designed. The one that we ended up going down, the road we went down in terms of like the GE, I think it is, chose was very anachronistic. It was done for, I spoke to actually a guy whose dad developed it. And it had something to do with sort of naval constraints and whatnot. And this guy's super concerned about the way that sort of the macro that we use in terms of developing, and Fukushima was built on that as well. The other issue is location, because when you're talking about a climate, some of this is baked into the cake, right? You're talking about more and more climate disasters, and it's hard to come up with a location that you can be sure is going to be not subject to some of these disasters. And remember, it's one of those type of things. It's the 1% doctrine. You could build 100 of these, and if one of them fails, the size of the catastrophe is enormous. So I think broadly speaking, I think there's an argument, but the problem is, who do you trust to actually execute that deal? The costs associated with it, not just in terms of sheer dollars, but the costs associated in terms of a lot of these people have profit incentives to cut corners. You cut corners on a solar grid or on a windmill farm, the implications of it are a lot less scary. So, I mean, I think I don't know why it's not included, but I suspect I've ticked off a couple of those reasons. Appreciate the call.
Thank you so much.
I mean, talk about wind not being reliable. It was certainly messing up your phone call.
It's a political and economic question, not a technological one.
Right. Yes. That story, though, I would love to read something about that story. I just happen to know a guy whose dad was on that team that developed, and He's like, yeah, my dad is shitting bricks about it. And I was like, wait, what? Anyways, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.